Chapter 1. Ha. Ha. A tall, muscular man in a singlet suddenly got up from the bed, sweating profusely. He was panting heavily, and his eyes were filled with confusion. Who am I? Where am I? Am I really me? These questions kept flashing in his mind, as if the man was thinking about the most profound philosophical questions in the world. I'm Leon. That's right. I should have been killed by lightning when I jumped off the cliff. But why am I still alive? And who is this Yang Yi? Gradually, his eyes regained their clarity and sharpness. The memories that filled his mind just now almost made Leon, whose soul had transmigrated, explode. For a moment, he almost lost himself. However, after going through this terrifying period of fusion, Leon gradually understood the past of his predecessor and the general idea of this world. That's right, he had indeed transmigrated. When he was struck by lightning, his soul entered an extra-dimensional space. After an unknown period of time, he broke through the air again and fused with this man. Yes, fusion. The other party's soul did not dissipate, but completely fused with Leon. It even made Leon think that he was this man, but he had only accepted Leon's memory. But in the competition between the two soul imprints, the more determined Leon had the upper hand. The predecessor was scattered and blended into Leon's soul. Of course, Leon was not reborn, because this world was different from the Earth that Leon used to be on. After going through Yang Yi's memory, Leon found many differences. For example, this planet was called Blue Planet and not Earth. For example, although China's history still had the Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, but the way the dynasties changed was different. For example, in the past 200 years, China still had a humiliating history of the fall of the country and a slow recovery, but the corresponding historical figures had disappeared. Similarly, those familiar songs, movies, and so on had disappeared without a trace. The development of history was very similar, but the content was very different. This is a world that seems familiar, but is completely unfamiliar to me. Interesting. Leon gave such an evaluation. After sitting silently on the bed for a long time, Leon accepted this fact. He gently stood up and walked into the small bathroom barefooted. There was a mirror inside. What was reflected in the mirror was a robust face. Upon closer inspection, it was even a little handsome. He was not the kind of handsome Korean version of Appa, nor was he as handsome as Andy Lau or Nicholas Tse, who could make girls scream at first sight. Instead, he looked more like Zhang Zhen. His face was square, his skin was dark, but his eyebrows were sharp, his eyes were bright, and his nose was straight. He was serious in speech and manner, and his whole body exuded a cold and oppressive aura. Was it related to Leon being an assassin in his previous life? No, they had nothing to do with each other. Leon used to be able to hide his murderous aura perfectly after changing his appearance. He could pretend to be a big-bellied high-ranking official and a shy student. Leon didn't even need to do anything to make this face possess a tenacity that was difficult to accept. Perhaps in the 60s and 70s, he was still considered very popular. But in this era of chasing after pretty boys, he was afraid that girls would retreat 3 feet when they saw him. However, Leon couldn't help but choke up, and his eyes turned red. As a cold-blooded assassin in his previous life, he didn't get emotional easily. But at this moment, Leon couldn't help but feel emotional. His hands trembled as he touched his own face. It didn't matter if he was handsome or not. What was important was that he finally had his own face that he had always dreamed of. No longer the one who was covered in scars and didn't dare to go out without wearing a human skin mask. This emotion came and went quickly. Leon quickly controlled his own emotions. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Although the smile looked a little cold, he was indeed in a good mood. After reading Yang Yi's memories, Leon knew that this man's life wasn't considered magnificent. It was even a little sullen, but it was the ordinary life that Leon had always dreamed of in his previous life. Yang Yi was a retired soldier from the countryside. Moreover, he had practiced martial arts since he was young. No wonder his body was so strong. This made Leon very satisfied. Because even if it couldn't be compared to his previous life, but with this foundation, it wouldn't be too easy to train again. Moreover, Leon secretly felt that this body had a very high talent for martial arts. Coupled with the internal cultivation techniques from his previous life, his future limit would probably be higher than his previous life. Of course, in this relatively peaceful world, Lion didn't need to fight and kill like in his previous life. Practicing martial arts could only be used as a form of self-defense. Going a little too far, back to Yang Yi's past. His previous life started to serve when he was 16 years old, and served for more than 10 years. His military rank wasn't low, but because he saw injustice on the road, he had a conflict with a high-ranking officer's son. The stubborn Yang Yi violently beat up the other party. With Yang Yi's skills, and without mercy, how could that foppish kid win? A few ribs were broken on the spot, and he vomited blood and was sent to the hospital. This matter was very big. Under the struggle of many forces, Yang Yi still couldn't keep his military uniform, and was forced to retire. In a sense, this was a punishment that only allowed Yang Yi to retain his reputation. Yang Yi was actually a hothead. At that time, there were still superiors who valued him and wanted to help him. As long as he successfully transferred to civilian work, he could return to his hometown and become a section-level cadre. Even the deputy director of the Public Security Bureau was not impossible. However, Yang Yi was stubborn like a bull. After he was discharged, he didn't want to bother with anyone. He just packed up his things and walked more than 10 kilometers away from the military camp. He never looked back. There was no need to talk about the past. After he retired, Yang Yi did many jobs such as private chauffeur, nightclub security guard, bodyguard. However, because his personality was too upright, he couldn't tolerate even a little bit of sand in his eyes. He offended many people, and his life got worse. Now he was even reduced to an ordinary hotel security guard, living a life where he couldn't differentiate between day and night, and was bullied by others. That's a bit sad. Leon touched his chin and sighed as he shook his head. He felt that his predecessor was indeed a good person, but he didn't know how to be flexible, and would easily suffer losses. If it was him, Leon's lips curled up slightly, revealing a cold smile. Perhaps those people who had offended him had long been fed to the wolves in the wilderness. Alright, you're always thinking about fighting and killing. You're not promising at all. Leon came back to his senses and patted his head, reminding himself that his life and identity were different now. It wasn't easy to have a normal identity. Leon didn't want to live the life of a fugitive like before. Maybe it's time to change the way I address myself? Leon. No, it should be Yang Yi, gradually accepted his new identity. He gently clenched his thick knuckles and thick fingers, looked at himself in the mirror, and thought to himself, I'm sorry, but I have to thank you. Next, let me help you fulfill your unfulfilled wish. Bang bang bang. Bang bang bang. The tube-shaped apartment in the urban village was narrow and closed. The knocking on the door was like the beating of a drum, which suddenly made Yang Yi, who was still immersed in the process of adapting to his new identity, quiver. Subconsciously, his eyes became sharp, his lips pursed, his left hand opened like an eagle's claw, and his right hand habitually reached behind him to look for a knife. The killing intent suddenly spread in this small space. But it was only for a moment. Papa, open the door. A soft and happy voice came through the door. She is here to see you. The childish voice immediately dissipated Yang Yi's murderous aura. Although he didn't withdraw his left hand in time, the tenderness in his eyes couldn't help but appear in his eyes. It made this tough man look even more human. Chapter 2. Yang Yi had a daughter, and it was his biological daughter. After integrating the memories of his predecessor, Yang Yi knew what was going on, but he was not mentally prepared to face everything that belonged to this body. What's more, the one outside the door was the original Yang Yi's most beloved daughter. Just now, when he heard his daughter's voice, his whole body emitted tenderness. It was the effect of the soul mark left by the original Yang Yi, and it could not be erased at all. However, even though he was a fearless cold-blooded killer in his previous life, Yang Yi was a little flustered at this moment. He did not know how to face it, and he was afraid that he would expose himself in front of his daughter. However, Shishi's expectant voice outside the door reached Yang Yi's ears, and the desire in his heart made him turn around and walk to the door even though he was afraid. The hard wooden door and the cold iron door were opened by Yang Yi, and a small face came into Yang Yi's sight. It was a face as delicate as a princess's in a fairy tale. She inherited her delicate eyebrows and small nose from her mother, and her big watery eyes and cherry lips that were as thin as cicada's wings. She had Yang Yi's shadow. Not only did she look like a carved jade, but she was also dressed up like a little princess by her mother. She was wearing a light pink lace dress, white stockings and black leather shoes, looking extra elegant and lovely. She was not as reserved as her mother. The little girl, who had not yet reached the age of 4, was in the lively age. When she saw her father, she jumped up happily and opened her slender little arms to ask for a hug. Yang Yi hurriedly bent down and picked up Shishi a little awkwardly. "Papa, Shishi missed you so much." The little girl giggled happily, hugged her father's neck, and asked coquettishly, "Papa, did you miss Shishi?" The little guy was soft as if he had no bones, and even had a milky fragrance. Hugging him was like hugging the happiness of the entire world. Yang Yi felt her dependence on him, and his heart, which was as cold as ice, couldn't help but soften. He blurted out, "Yes, of course." Perhaps he was still affected by the soul imprint of his predecessor, but Yang Yi had already fused with those memories. He knew that Shishi had not come for almost half a month, because her mother was very busy. Yang Yi missed his daughter so much that he almost turned into a love-gazing rock. Therefore his answer was not false at all. Shishi was very satisfied with her father's answer. The little girl giggled, leaned forward, and gave her father a sweet kiss as a reward from the princess. Yang Yi was stunned for a moment. He lowered his head and looked at the little girl with bright eyes in his arms. He couldn't help but feel proud in his heart. "This is my daughter, Yang Yi." Whether it was the soul imprint of the original Yang Yi or not, the more Yang Yi looked at her, the more he liked her. The tenderness in his eyes completely covered the vigilance that had never disappeared in his previous life. After cuddling with Shishi for a while, Yang Yi finally had time to look at his sister-in-law, who was a little impatient next to him. "Murphy is not coming?" Yang Yi was a little disappointed, but he also secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Murphy was Shishi's mother, but she wasn't anyone to Yang Yi. She wasn't his ex-wife, she wasn't even his girlfriend. In fact, she was a superstar in the music industry. The story behind this was a long story. To put it simply, the marriage between Yang Yi and Murphy was a coincidence. However, just like that, Shishi was pregnant. Murphy didn't choose to have an abortion. Instead, she retired from the entertainment industry without warning and secretly gave birth to the child abroad. It wasn't until Shishi was 2 years old that Yang Yi, who accidentally came to Jiangqing to work, bumped into Murphy. Only then did he know that he was going to be a father. No matter what, Shishi needed a father. Murphy was also willing to arrange for Shishi and Yang Yi to get along. However, perhaps due to the difference in status, Yang Yi and Murphy's relationship didn't make much progress in the past year. As Murphy's cousin-cum personal assistant, Mo Shawan looked down on Yang Yi, who was a scumbag and a good-for-nothing. She said impatiently, "Sister Feifei is busy recording a song. She doesn't have time to come." Mo Shawan didn't want to stay with Yang Yi any longer. She had been brooding over Murphy's sudden retirement. She felt that it had completely affected Murphy's development, so she had been blaming Yang Yi. "Okay, now that I've sent Shishi to you, I have to go back. Sister Feifei still has work to do today." Mo Shawan snorted arrogantly. She placed Shishi's small school bag on top of the suitcase beside her. However, when she faced Shishi, her tone was much better. "Shishi, say goodbye to Auntie. Auntie will pick you up the day after tomorrow." Shishi was still in her father's arms. How could she be willing to get down? The little girl turned her head around happily and waved goodbye to Mo Shawan. Only then did Mo Shawan turn around and leave satisfied. However, Mo Shawan still didn't give Yang Yi any face. She had no intention of saying goodbye to Yang Yi. Creak, creak, creak. The old fan made an unpleasant sound when it shook its head. This further accentuated the awkwardness of this quiet period. Yes, after Mo Shawan left, Yang Yi faced the little girl alone at home. Suddenly he panicked. He didn't know what to do. Shishi sat on the bed. Her slender legs, wrapped in white tights, hung down and swung gently. The little girl blinked her big, watery eyes. She looked at her father walking back and forth in front of her, scratching his ears and cheeks. She didn't understand what was going on. In fact, Yang Yi was very nervous. He could talk and laugh with his target at a high-end cocktail party under his disguise, and he could also flirt with a prostitute in a vulgar place. However, when he faced his own daughter, the most innocent little girl in the world, Yang Yi was completely dumbfounded. He didn't know how to communicate with her. Moreover, he didn't know how to take care of a little girl. Shishi, do you still want to drink water? After holding it in for a while, Yang Yi turned his target to the cup on the bedside table. He used this trick 2 minutes ago. Shishi had just drunk a large cup of water and was already burping. When she heard her father's words, she pouted and waved her hand. No, Shishi doesn't want to drink water. I'm so full. Well, it seemed that it was going to be awkward again. Yang Yi was secretly anxious. Fortunately, Shishi opened her mouth. She remembered a lot of things she wanted to say to her father in the past half a month. He saw the little girl turned around and half knelt on the bed with her long legs. She took her school bag from the side and unzipped it. Papa, look. Cece happily took out a large sketchbook, opened it, and showed it to Yang Yi. This is what I drew. It took me a long time to draw it. On the sketchbook, it was a very rough colored pencil drawing. A round sun was drawn in the sky, and below it was a brown house. On the grass in front of the house, there were 3 little people who looked like matchsticks. Yang Yi, who was relieved, sat on the edge of the bed. Shishi immediately went into her father's arms like a puppy and found a comfortable position to lean on. She was afraid that her father would not understand. So she pointed to the little people and introduced them one by one. This is Shishi, this is Papa, and this is Mom. The 3 little people stood on the grass hand in hand. The youngest, Shishi, stood in the middle, holding her parents' hands. Yang Yi did not comment on the drawing, but the little girl leaned in his arms. He was a little flustered, but he was also very happy for some reason. Listening to Shishi's childish words, he felt very warm. Yang Yi seemed to be attached to this happy feeling in his heart. Perhaps, it was not bad to live like this. Chapter 3. Logically speaking, Shishi's drawing was still at the level of a child's doodling. However, in terms of artistic conception and composition, Shishi still had some talent. Young Rant's eyes lit up. After praising and encouraging the little girl, he suggested, Shishi, Daddy will teach you how to draw, okay? In his previous life, Yang Yi had learned zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting in the assassin training camp. He knew all kinds of skills, which were the basic skills of disguise. After all, the next mission of the poker assassin organization was the most difficult and arduous. Without any skills to hide in the crowd, Yang Yi would have been caught by the police countless times. Yang Yi didn't like drawing very much, and later became obsessed with music. In his free time, he liked to listen to music, watch movies, and spend some time in his carefully arranged safe house. As for drawing and other skills, after leaving the training camp, he didn't improve at all. However, it was still possible to fool Shishi. Of course, it wouldn't work if he just talked about it, so Yang Yi showed Shishi his skills at the beginning. Under the little girl's amazed gaze, Yang Yi held a black pencil and gently sketched. After a few strokes, a little girl with long hair appeared on the paper. It had the charm of a cartoon style in his previous life, and the little girl's facial contours, expression, and appearance were very similar to Shishi's. She was also wearing the lace gauze dress, long pantyhose, and small leather shoes that Shishi was wearing now. In addition, Yang Yi deliberately drew the little girl's head big, and her big eyes were very anime style. Her hair that reached the ground was like a waterfall falling down, and she was very cute. Shishi liked it so much that she couldn't take her eyes off it. She opened her small mouth and exclaimed in admiration, "Wow, Papa is so awesome." Hearing his daughter's praise, Yang Yi felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart. It was simply bursting. Even though Yang Yi had been careful not to speak too much for fear of exposing himself, he couldn't help but ask, "Shishi, can you tell who Dad is drawing?" Yang Yi used to be a soldier, so his voice was loud and clear. But when he was talking to his daughter, he was so gentle that he didn't seem like a tough guy at all. Not to mention Leon, who had always been cold and aloof in his previous life. Even he himself wouldn't dare to believe it. I know. It's Shishi. Shishi was bashful. She pointed at herself happily, but she also felt embarrassed. She giggled and threw herself into her father's arms, only revealing half of her bright eyes. For almost the entire afternoon, Yang Yi was teaching Shishi how to sketch. He also personally helped the little fellow fill in some of her simple paintings. Shishi was having a great time. Her bell-like laughter rang out one after another. Little did she know that her father was actually happier than she was. Because Yang Yi was worried that he would expose himself, it didn't happen. Perhaps Shishi would feel that the father in front of her was no longer the clumsy and dull father she used to know. But she was still young and didn't have so many suspicions. The little fellow firmly believed in her own eyes. Her father was her father. How could it be someone else? In fact, Yang Yi in the past would have found it difficult to even appreciate Shishi's paintings, let alone draw. But Shishi didn't care why her father suddenly became so powerful. The little fellow was now almost a fanatic fan who worshipped her father. Happy times passed quickly. Unknowingly, the sun was setting in the west, and the street lights outside the window lit up with a faint halo. Shishi was tired from playing. A child's physique was not as good as an adult's. Under Yang Yi's coaxing, she fell into a deep sleep. Yang Yi carefully carried Shishi to the middle of the bed. He carefully placed a small pillow on her, and tucked her soft hair into a bun to prevent her from feeling uncomfortable. It was April, and the early spring was still chilly. Especially after the sun went down, the air was slightly chilly. Yang Yi went to the cupboard and searched for a while before he found a neither thin nor thick towel, and covered Shishi with it. Okay, the question now is, what should we eat tonight? Yang Yi gently closed the bedroom door and rubbed his chin as he pondered. The place he lived in was about 20 square meters. But although it was small, it had everything. There was a bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. Of course, every small space was very narrow, especially the kitchen. Other than a stove and a sink, the rest of the space in the kitchen could only fit a strong man like him. It couldn't accommodate anyone else. Even moving around was troublesome. His previous life was still better. He had money, a place, and could even live in a mansion. However, Yang Yi was not picky. He rummaged through the fridge and rice jar left behind by his predecessor, thinking about what to prepare for Shishi's dinner. When it came to cooking, Yang Yi was a rookie in the past. He only knew how to cook some white rice. The dishes that went with the rice were either pickled vegetables, olives, or vegetables that he boiled himself and ate with soy sauce. On one hand, it was because of his low income and lack of money. After having a child, Yang Yi saved up all his money and used it to buy everything Shishi wanted when he was with Shishi. It had to be said that Yang Yi's love for his daughter was definitely more than anything else in the world. Of course, on the other hand, Yang Yi did not have the cells to learn cooking in the past. But the current Yang Yi was different. In his previous life, he lived alone and was very well off. When it came to food, he would definitely not treat himself badly. Even if he personally cooked, whether it was Chinese food or Western food, he would be able to take it out. Of course, in his previous life, he could only admire himself. Now he could finally cook for his beloved little one. Yang Yi had to be more serious. However, Yang Yi quickly scratched his head. Even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. In the fridge, there were a few eggs and ham sausages. Then there was the cabbage that the previous Yang Yi ate for many years. There was still plenty of rice in the rice jar. However, it was obvious that with the rice, even if it was Yang Yi's cooking, it would be tasteless. Yang Yi could still make do with it, but he could not use this pig food to entertain his daughter. However, at this time, it was too late to buy groceries. Yang Yi rented a house in a remote area. It would take half an hour to walk to the nearest market. Yang Yi was not at ease leaving Shishi alone at home. So, what should he eat for dinner? Should he go out to a restaurant? But the hygiene of the small restaurants near the village in the city was worrying. Yang Yi finally looked at the instant noodles box in the corner. There was still half a box of instant noodles inside. This was the spiritual food of his previous life after he came back from the night shift. Sometimes, when he was tired and hungry, he did not have the leisure to wait for the rice to be cooked. He would make a bowl of hot instant noodles and eat it before going to sleep. Instant noodles are the food of loneliness. It is the best friend of those who cannot sleep. Looking at this half box of instant noodles, Yang Yi's memory of it emerged. He could not help but sigh. His heart was slightly sour. Yang Yi shook his head and threw this thought away. For tonight's dinner, he already had an idea. Chapter 4. The houses in the urban village not only had poor sound insulation, but also had poor ventilation. As Yang Yi was busy in the kitchen, a strong aroma bypassed the thin door and slipped into the bedroom. The little girl on the bed was like a quiet sleeping beauty. Her delicate face was set off by a few knotty hair, which made her look delicate and delicate. Perhaps it was the aroma of the aroma. The little girl's pink nose flapped slightly, and a little greedily stuck out her small tongue to lick her mouth. In the kitchen, Yang Yi was busy around a small iron pot that was simmering slowly. The water and boiled instant noodles were rolling with a strong aroma, which was the mixed aroma of seasoning packets and sesame oil. Yang Yi threw away the oil packets of the instant noodles. He didn't trust the oil. Now Yang Yi pulled out the finely cut ham sausage and evenly mixed it with long chopsticks. The taste of the ham sausage blended with the boiling soup, which seemed to be more fragrant. At this time, Yang Yi's ears moved. He heard a rustling sound, and then the sound of the bedroom door being opened. He poked his head out to take a look. The little fellow was still rubbing his sleepy eyes and walking out in a daze with bare feet. "Papa, Papa." She, who had just woken up, said in a soft voice, with a sense of insecurity and anxiety. "Papa is here." Yang Yi hurried over and picked up the little girl. In her father's arms, she was relieved of a burden, and her sleepy spirit gradually woke up. She put her arms around her father's neck and said with a pout, "Papa, she is hungry. It will be ready soon. Papa is making dinner for you." Yang Yi helped Shishi fix her hair and comforted her with a smile. Of course, the noodles were not ready yet. Yang Yi helped Shishi put on her slippers and went back to the kitchen. Under Shishi's curious gaze, Yang Yi couldn't help but show off his skills. He threw the washed egg high into the air, causing Shishi to exclaim in surprise. Then, Yang Yi held the kitchen knife in his right hand and went up to meet the egg. At a distance that was hard to see with the naked eye, Yang Yi made a movement to dissipate the force, and the egg landed steadily on the back of the knife without a single crack. Before Shishi could react, Yang Yi had already flicked his right hand, channeled his strength into the back of the knife, and tossed the egg up again. His movements were extremely fast, and the tip of the knife flipped over, cutting right into the eggshell and firmly embedding the egg inside. "Wow!" Shishi cried out in surprise. The little fellow's mouth was so wide open that an egg could be stuffed inside. She subconsciously covered her mouth with her small hands in a ladylike manner. Yang Yi smiled. In fact, he had never practiced these tricks before. He had only watched videos on the internet before. However, with his skill in controlling the knife like a god, it was not too difficult for him to do it on the spot. However, Yang Yi felt a sense of accomplishment to be able to make his daughter so happy. The egg white flowed down along the knife, and slowly spread on the instant noodles under Yang Yi's shaking. Then with a gentle shake, the gap in the eggshell cracked a little, and the egg yolk fell down, spreading evenly in the frame of the egg white. The little one couldn't see, so she could only stand on her tiptoes and curiously poke her little head out. The next step was not so complicated. Yang Yi casually cracked 3 eggs on the side as decorations, then turned off the gas stove and covered the lid. The eggs below were overcooked, so they didn't taste good. The remaining heat of the pot and the temperature of the steaming water were just enough to make them medium well. It's a pity that there are no green onions. Otherwise, it could be used as a plate decoration. Yang Yi thought to himself. Well, wait for Daddy to cook some cabbage, then we can have dinner. Yang Yi smiled. He carried the pot of instant noodles to the tea table in the living room and told the little one not to burn herself. Cece was so greedy that she kept swallowing her saliva as she followed behind her father. There was cabbage in the refrigerator. Yang Yi didn't waste it just now. He had already picked it up, washed it, and put it aside. Now he took another pot of hot water, quickly boiled it, drained the water, and put it on a plate. Then Yang Yi heated the oil in the iron pot, poured in the chopped garlic and soy sauce, and made a sauce that could make people's mouths water. While the oil was boiling, he poured it on the boiled cabbage, making a sizzling sound. Suddenly, the rich aroma of vegetables and oil filled the whole house. It smells good, it smells good. She wants to eat it. The little one's stomach growled, and she couldn't wait to jump up and down. She was quite sensible. She took the initiative to help her father carry the washed dishes and chopsticks, and then she took out a small stool exclusive for Shishi and sat on it obediently, waiting for dinner. In fact, Yang Yi's movements were quite fast. The instant noodles were not stuffy for too long. He lifted the lid, and the instant noodles in the pot were just soft without losing their chewiness. However, Shishi's attention was attracted by the heart-shaped egg in the middle. Yang Yi's dazzling skills just made the egg spread out in the shape of a heart. The golden yolk was inlaid in the middle of the white egg, as if it was a work of art. In fact, Yang Yi felt that the other 3 eggs he had cracked were more delicious. This heart-shaped egg might not be as tender as the other 3. After all, it was spread out and boiled for a long time. Shishi saw her father put an egg in her bowl, and the little one immediately refused. She pouted her pink little mouth and said, "I want that, I want that." It seemed that even for children, it was an era where appearance was important. Yang Yi smiled slightly. Fortunately, he was prepared. He used the spoon in his left hand and the chopsticks in his right hand. He used his strength and gently scooped up the egg with the noodles under it, and quickly transferred it to Shishi's small bowl. The egg on the noodles still maintained its original appearance. "Be careful." Shishi was very nervous. When she saw her father scooping the noodles back into the bowl, she was worried that he had broken something. No. Okay. Yang Yi smiled and pushed Shishi's bowl in front of her and handed over the chopsticks. "Let's start eating." Shishi had learned to eat alone. The main reason was that in the past 6 months, Murphy had begun to prepare for her comeback, so she had less time to take care of the little one. She couldn't feed her 1 bite at a time. Sometimes Shishi even had to eat and play by herself in Murphy's recording studio. Now Shishi picked up the chopsticks, but she was a little hesitant. She gently tapped the egg on the noodles with her chopsticks. Smelling the aroma, she was drooling but reluctant to eat it. The little fellow raised her head and looked at her father hesitantly. "Papa, let's not eat it, okay? It's so cute." Yang Yi laughed. He picked up the egg at the bottom of the bowl and said with a smile, "Try this first." Shishi, who had been hungry for a long time, couldn't help but pick up the egg with difficulty and take a gentle bite. Sizzle. The half-solidified and half-liquid egg yolk overflowed from the corner of Shishi's mouth and dripped on her clothes. It was the first time that the little fellow had eaten it, so she was a little scared. Yang Yi took out a tissue and wiped the clothes on the little fellow's chest. He was very nervous, thinking that Shishi would not be used to it. However, soon Shishi's eyes lit up and she greedily licked the corner of her mouth with her small tongue. It was delicious. This kind of medium-rare egg was the most fragrant and delicious. Chapter 5. It's so delicious. Shishi likes it so much. The little fellow rubbed her bulging belly in satisfaction, and leaned back on her little stool in an unladylike manner. She giggled at her father. There were still some noodles in the bowl, but it was only because the little girl couldn't eat anymore. Whether it was the fragrant and smooth eggs, the fragrant instant noodles, or the fresh and juicy cabbage, Shishi liked them all very much. She ate 10% more than before. "Tomorrow Dad will go shopping and make more delicious food for you." Yang Yi smiled. He looked very calm, but in fact he was very proud. In the past, when he was cooking alone, he could only admire himself. Now with his daughter's praise, he felt a sense of accomplishment. It was rare for him to have such a good appetite, so Yang Yi poured the noodles left by Shishi into his bowl and ate them up. Although Yang Yi decided to take Shishi to the amusement park tomorrow, which was Shishi's wish, how to pass the time tonight? Should he continue to sit awkwardly face to face with Shishi? In the urban village, Yang Yi didn't live near a place for children to play. Yang Yi, who didn't have any good ideas, pondered for a long time before he came up with an idea. "Shishi, Dad will tell you a story, okay?" Yang Yi said while holding a towel and wiping the little girl's hair, who had just taken a bath. After taking a bath, Shishi became a quiet and lovely little girl again. She sat obediently and let her father comb her hair. The little girl indeed inherited Murphy's genes. She was a little beauty since she was a child, and her soft long hair was very delicate. Although she only came to her father's place to play for 2 days, her meticulous mother, Murphy, prepared a large suitcase of clothes for her, including several sets of pajamas. Now she was wearing a set of pink bunny pajamas, which was chosen by Shishi herself. It was said to be her favorite cartoon character. This also gave Yang Yi an inspiration. Dad can tell stories? The little girl couldn't believe it, because her father had never read bedtime stories to Shishi like her mother did in the past. However, there were stories to listen to. Shishi didn't think too much about it. She nodded excitedly and said happily, "Yes, Shishi loves to listen to stories." What story should he tell? In his previous life, Yang Yi had been fighting in the assassin training camp since he was young. Not to mention fairy tales, he didn't even have a childhood. Therefore, he knew that there were fairy tales like Hans Christian Andersen and Grimm's fairy tales, but he had never read a single page of them. Therefore, Yang Yi could only target some of the movies that he had watched before. Fortunately, at least when some of the animated movies became popular, as a movie lover, he did not miss them. Cough cough. Yang Yi cleared his throat and began to tell the story a little nervously. A long time ago, in a beautiful kingdom surrounded by the sea, there lived 2 lovely beautiful little princesses. Shishi was immediately brought into the scene by her father's description. Yang Yi's memory had always been very good. As long as he had seen the movie, he could remember the details clearly. He said, "The elder sister was called Elsa, and the younger sister was called Anna. Anna was very lively, and she liked to play with her elder sister." That's right, the story Yang Yi was going to tell was the animated movie that was popular all over the world, Frozen. Shishi blinked her big eyes and asked curiously, "Dad, why do their names sound like Americans?" The United States of this world was like the United States of Yang Yi's previous life. It was located in North America, and was also one of the most powerful countries in the world. Shishi was born in the United States, but her citizenship was not transferred to the United States. Murphy left Shishi in China. Yang Yi smiled and said, "They are not Americans, but they are indeed foreigners." The story was interrupted by the little girl, and Yang Yi continued. The following plot was not only moving with the scenery. Yang Yi's voice was very gentle, and one could not feel that he was actually a tall and strong man at all. Actually, the elder sister, Elsa, has the magic ability to create snow since she was young. It's like a lot of snowflakes floating down with a wave of her arm. Shishi's eyes followed the movement of her father's arm. She seemed to really see the snowflakes dancing in the air. Her little face was very sincere and envious. Magic, it's so powerful. But it's not a good thing. Yang Yi continued. One night Anna couldn't sleep, so she came to wake her elder sister up and said that she wanted to see a snowman. Snowmen could be made? Shishi knew what a snowman was. Her big eyes lit up immediately, just like the cute little sister Anna in the movie. Yang Yi described to Shishi the scene where Elsa took her younger sister to play in the snow in a big palace. With a magic spell, snowflakes would appear all over the sky, and a thick layer of snow would be created to build a snowman. Then they would take the snow baby to ice skate. Every scene was very dreamy and fascinating. Yang Yi, who was not an assassin in his previous life, was actually a literary youth. He was very good at describing. The story he told was no different from watching a movie. Shishi felt as if she could see the scenes. Of course, the little girl still said with some envy, "Shishi hasn't played in the snow yet. Mom didn't even let her." That's because playing in the snow is dangerous. Especially for Anna, who is about the same age as you. Yang Yi said gently as he gently tapped Shishi's little head. The story was progressing slowly. When Shishi heard that Anna was injured and unconscious, the little girl immediately grabbed her father's hand nervously. Her delicate little hand was sweating because of nervousness. Fortunately, Grandpa Goblin Dr. Pelby saved Anna. Unfortunately, Anna's memory of Elsa's magic was wiped clean. Shishi did not understand this plot. Her big eyes blinked, and she was a little confused. However, Yang Yi then used a low voice to tell the story after Anna woke up. The king wanted Elsa to stop thinking and using these magic spells, so he dismissed many staff in the castle. He also separated Elsa and Anna, so that they could not have any contact. It happened almost overnight. Anna didn't know what had happened at all. Her dearest sister, Elsa, locked herself in her room and stopped playing with her. Even if she sang outside the door, Elsa, who was traumatized, ignored her in order to protect her younger sister. That's right. Unknowingly, Shishi's big eyes were filled with tears. She seemed to feel Anna's loneliness. Because of Murphy's special identity, Shishi could not play with other children. What should we do? What should we do, Dad? Quickly help Anna, help Sister Elsa. The little girl's soft heart was touched. She grabbed her father's hand and said in a choked voice. Yang Yi quickly sat down and hugged the little girl in his arms. He patted her little head and coaxed. Don't worry, there's more to come. The night was still very long. Yang Yi was ready to tell a long story until Shishi fell asleep. Chapter 6. I don't want to, I don't want to. Shishi's sobs were like the moonlight variation in the OTS song, The Legend of Qin, Full Moon Night, until dawn. It was full of sadness and stubbornness. Yang Yi stood awkwardly by the bed and scratched his head. The little girl wasn't crying because of the story of Frozen that her father told her last night. The story had a perfect ending. It was just that she didn't want to go to sleep, because she wanted to hear the story. After listening to it, she was so excited that she wriggled around in bed until midnight. Therefore, she couldn't get up in the morning. Yang Yi saw that he couldn't wake her up, so he let her sleep until late in the morning. Well, she was even more unwilling now. I want to play all day. Shishi had just woken up. Her morning grumpiness mixed with her obsession to play in the amusement park turned into an indescribable grievance. She could only cry. Yang Yi was really dumbfounded. Why was she crying? Whether in his previous life or this life, Yang Yi was a man of steel who didn't cry easily. He really couldn't understand why Shishi was crying. Was it because she didn't have enough time to play in the amusement park? However, Yang Yi explained that he couldn't wake Shishi up, so he let Shishi continue to sleep. However, Shishi didn't listen. She was immersed in her own grievance and cried miserably. Women are so difficult to understand. Yang Yi muttered in his heart. No, girls are even harder to understand. His previous life was better. Women's problems weren't problems that could be solved with money. Perhaps Yang Yi wasn't very good at coaxing children. He tried very hard to find a solution in the memory of his predecessor. Unfortunately, the original Yang Yi was also silly. He sat there like him and watched his daughter cry. In the end, he was reprimanded by Murphy. Yang Yi still tried very hard to coax his daughter. He squatted down by the bed. Because he was too tall, half of his knee was on the ground. In this way, he could see Shishi at the same level as her. Don't cry. Dad promised you today that we can play as long as you want. Okay. Yang Yi coaxed softly. It seemed that the effect wasn't obvious. Shishi was still sobbing slowly. However, she didn't cry that much. She seemed to be getting better. The little girl let go of her hands that were rubbing her eyes and looked at her father with tears in her eyes. Her tear-stained face was very pitiful. She stretched out her little arms, sobbing, and said softly, "Hug." How could Yang Yi not agree? He hurriedly took the little fellow into his arms, stood up, and paced back and forth to coax him. Although the little girl's dad her teat. After she was picked up by her dad, she immediately hugged her dad's neck tightly. Then she sobbed on her dad's chest. She was still sobbing. She had stopped crying. It was just that she was still sobbing. Okay. Don't cry. It's all Dad's fault. Yang Yi's steel-like heart was almost melted by his daughter's crying. He gently patted Shishi's back and said softly. Hearing the sobbing sound on his left chest gradually stop, Yang Yi knew that he had finally coaxed her. It wasn't easy. Yang Yi, who was good at learning, thought quickly. Could it be that it's not important what I coax, but how I coax her? Yang Yi remembered reading an article before. It said that a woman didn't need you to find a solution for her. Most of the time, she just needed a hug that she could rely on. At that time, Killer Leon, who didn't know what love was, scoffed at it. Now, it seemed that the analysis of the article was very reasonable. Yang Yi felt that his parenting experience bar had increased by a lot. Jiangcheng, an ancient city in the south of Jiangsu and Zhejiang, had been named one of the world's top 100 livable cities by foreign publications. This honor was not only due to its geographical environment and long history, but also because of the huge investment in municipal projects. The renovation of historical sites, the maintenance of natural scenic spots, and the planning of urban greening, Jiangcheng's investment could be said to be unmatched by any other major city in the country. Out of the village, the straight Jiangnan North Road was full of leaves and fragrant camphor trees. At a glance, it was full of greenery. On the sidewalk, there were even more flowers. White lush orchids and purple irises complemented each other, forming a beautiful spring scenery in Jiangcheng. Of course, the most beautiful one was Xixi, who was singing and dancing happily in front of the flowers. The little girl was wearing a beautiful flower-like dress, like a flower fairy. She ran in front of them, skipping and singing the song that her father had taught her when he was telling her a story yesterday. Let _it go. Let _it go. Can't hold it back any more. Although she was only singing the line that she remembered, the little fellow sang it with perfect articulation and a sweet voice like an oriole's, attracting the admiring gazes of passers-by on the side of the road. Murphy had lived abroad with her parents when she was young. In addition, in order to avoid the pursuit of the media, she had stayed in the United States for nearly 2 years after giving birth to Xixi. Therefore, she insisted on maintaining a bilingual education for Xixi. This was also why Xixi could learn these 2 lyrics so quickly. However, this issue had once caused a huge conflict between Murphy and Yang Yi. In the past, Yang Yi was an out-and-out patriot, and even a little angry. He felt that China's culture was broad and profound. Xixi didn't even learn the things of her ancestors, and even spoke a foreign language that he didn't understand. This kind of education was something that Yang Yi hated deeply. Murphy wanted to explain to Yang Yi, but later found that this guy couldn't communicate at all. The rift between them was left on the first day of their reunion. Of course, the current Yang Yi didn't have that stubborn problem at all. In his previous life, he was proficient in 8 languages. Now, teaching Xixi to sing English songs didn't have any burden at all. Cece, wait a minute, drink some water. Yang Yi stopped the little girl, who was a little happy without Murphy's discipline. He took out a children's water bottle from the school bag hanging on his shoulder, unscrewed the lid and handed it to Xixi. Xixi was very obedient and drank the water in big mouthfuls. Yang Yi squatted down, took out a small towel, and wiped the sweat on Xixi's face. In his slightly cold eyes, Xixi's pretty face was reflected. The little girl was drinking water while blinking her big eyes and looking at her father. This scene was actually so heartwarming. There's no need to walk, we can take a taxi there. The bus stop was still a long way away. Yang Yi silently counted the money in his pocket and said to Xixi. Today, he took out all the money that Yang Yi used to live frugally and stuffed in his shoebox. Although it wasn't easy for the predecessor to save money, Yang Yi didn't have the habit of saving money. Money was to be spent. If he ran out of money, couldn't he just earn it back? Chapter 7. The amusement park in Jiangcheng City was located in the Dongqing district, which was not far from where Yang Yi lived. Thus, they arrived quickly by taxi. As soon as they arrived at the entrance, while Yang Yi was still buying tickets, the little girl was already looking at the high Ferris wheel and shouting excitedly, "Papa, I want to sit on the Ferris wheel. Papa, take me to the Ferris wheel." Perhaps he was affected by the little girl's emotions. Yang Yi's slightly gloomy state of mind gradually became sunny. He laughed and picked up the little girl. With a gentle push, Xixi sat on her father's neck. This was the first time. Xixi felt the feeling of riding on the clouds. The little girl screamed unreservedly, then giggled even more happily. There were many children at the entrance of the park. This amusement park was probably the most attractive place for children in Jiangcheng City, besides the zoo. Yang Yi, who was tall and strong, and the little princess Xixi, who was smiling sweetly on his neck, were still very conspicuous in the crowd. They immediately attracted everyone's attention. Of course, the children frequently looked at Xixi, who was sitting high up, with envy in their eyes. Not long after, not far behind Yang Yi, a little boy also pulled his father, shouting that he also wanted to sit on his father's neck. However, his father was unwilling. Thus, the little boy began to cry. The noise was so loud that even the initiator, Yang-yi, couldn't help but turn his head to look. With just a glance, Yang-yi, the cold guy, twitched the corner of his mouth and almost laughed out loud. No wonder his father was unwilling. Look at the little boy's figure, which was the same as the mother next to him. He was only 6 or 7 years old, but his arms and legs were much fatter than ordinary children, not to mention his chubby belly. His father, who was standing awkwardly at a loss, was as thin as a stick. If he really let the little fatty climb up, his father would probably kneel down first. Well, after all, it was because of him, so Yang-yi didn't have the nerve to continue watching the fun. After it was their turn, Yang-yi quickly checked in with Shishi. When they were leaving, Cece looked back curiously and asked in confusion, "Papa, why is that brother's papa unwilling to do so?" Yang-yi could already feel the resentful stares coming from behind him. The first thing to play was naturally the Ferris wheel that Shishi had been looking forward to for a long time. However, in front of the Ferris wheel, Yang-yi was a little disappointed. The Ferris wheel was not very magnificent, at most about 50 meters high. It was not fun at all. Yang-yi was originally excited to experience the amusement park with Shishi and experience the innocence of children. However, for Yang-yi, this kind of high Ferris wheel was not enough to arouse his interest at all. Of course, Yang-yi did not forget that Shishi was the main character today. He and Shishi lined up and walked into a small box on the Ferris wheel. Clang! The door was closed. The Ferris wheel didn't stop. Sitting in the private room, the creaking sound of the wheel turning outside could be heard clearly. At first, Shishi was still excitedly watching from the window, but as the box slowly increased in height, the little girl was a little panicked. There was a kind of fear that gradually hung in the air. Coupled with the small enclosed space of the box, the sense of oppression intensified this kind of fear. "Papa, I'm scared." Shishi's little head slowly shrank, trembling as she turned to look at her father. Yang-yi was also looking outside with interest just now. Hearing his daughter's cry, he quickly bent down, held Shishi in his arms and sat down. Don't be afraid, Papa is here." Yang-yi gently patted Shishi's little head. Her soft hair was very comfortable to touch. In her father's arms, Shishi's fear of heights was reduced a lot. The child's curious nature made her couldn't help but poke her head out to look. "It's become smaller," Shishi murmured. "Papa, look over there, that little brother just now." Papa, look, that's a car. It looks like a little bug." The little girl couldn't wait to share everything she saw with her father, and Yang-yi also smiled and nodded patiently in response. After getting off the Ferris wheel, Shishi was still a little unsatisfied, and pestered her father to sit on it again. This time, she didn't need to be held in her father's arms. The little girl seemed to have adapted. What made Cece very happy was that when the Ferris wheel reached the highest point, a silver-white plane appeared in the sky and slowly streaked across the sky. "Plane, Papa, it's a plane." Shishi was so excited that she jumped up. Fortunately, the little girl's weight was limited, so she couldn't shake the giant Ferris wheel at all. If Yang-yi was jumping, there would be an accident. Yang-yi was also very childish. He squeezed his daughter's little head together, laughed, and competed to see the plane through the window. The amusement park in Jiang City was actually very simple, at least in Yang-yi's eyes. Although it also had large equipment such as the Ferris wheel, roller coaster, pirate ship, the scale was relatively small. And apart from these, small projects such as bumper cars, merry-go-round, maze huts, and so on were not satisfactory. However, Shishi had a lot of fun. She was not old enough to ride the roller coaster, but under the guidance of her father, she played the very exciting bumper cars and merry-go-round, and the little girl was very happy. The consequences were also very serious. In the evening, when the amusement park was about to close, Shishi acted like a spoiled child and cried and didn't want to go back. "Can you not go back?" The little girl hugged her father's leg and begged with tears in her eyes. "It's not that I don't want you to play, but now it's about to close. Look, the Ferris wheel has stopped." Yang-yi explained with a headache. No, Shishi doesn't want to." Shishi shook her head unwillingly. In fact, this scene didn't only happen to Yang-yi and Shishi. At the gate of the amusement park, the children who were unwilling to leave lined up. It wasn't only Shishi who was crying, but there were also people who were crying even more miserably than her. For example, the little fatty that Yang Yi and the others saw before they came in. His cries were so tragic that several young children were stunned and looked at him with tears in their eyes. The cries came one after another, and Shishi also responded. The emotions of sadness and reluctance resonated with the surrounding environment and couldn't be stopped. Yang Yi grabbed Shishi's school bag in his hand and was a little annoyed. MD. Why are children so troublesome? Yang Yi felt that his head was about to explode. He really felt that taking care of children was more troublesome than cracking the powerful security system to kill a politician in the past. This was King unreasonable, alright? It was obvious that the amusement park was about to close. Why were you crying with your father? Could crying make the amusement park reopen? In the past, Yang Yi was afraid of trouble, so he was afraid that he would directly pack up and leave, waving his sleeves and not leaving a cloud behind. But now he held back his temper, because the little girl's delicate little hand was grabbing his trouser leg. That helpless and pitiful look made Yang Yi's temper suddenly vanish. Forget it, I'm afraid I'll have to deal with such a clingy little girl in my life. Yang Yi smiled bitterly in his heart and squatted down. Chapter 8. What does a real amusement park look like? Now let me tell you about it. In the private room of a small restaurant, Cece was sitting on a high child seat. Her two small hands were grabbing the white chicken leg that her father had given her. She was gnawing on it with all her might. She even blinked her long eyelashes and looked at her father with her bright eyes as she listened to him attentively. Previously, Shishi had cried and refused to leave the amusement park, but Yang Yi finally found a way to coax the little girl out. He drew a picture for Shishi. Do you want to know what the best amusement park in the world looks like? So, Shishi was brought out of the amusement park by her father with a strong sense of curiosity. It was already evening. Yang Yi found a small restaurant outside called Cantonese Cuisine King's Mansion. While eating dinner with Shishi, he described the so-called best amusement park. That amusement park should be as big as a small town. Yang Yi saw that Shishi found it difficult to understand the concept of a small town. He changed his words and said, "What if I bring Shishi in to play for 2 days and 2 nights and we can't finish all the attractions?" Shishi's eyes lit up. 2 days and 2 nights. How fun would that be? Yang Yi continued. This shouldn't be called an amusement park. It should be called an amusement park, or even a big holiday resort. It has many theme parks that are as fun as amusement parks and many types of theme hotels. Yes, what Yang Yi wanted to introduce was the world-famous Disneyland in his previous life. Of course, he had no interest in Disneyland before, but when he was doing a task, he followed the target and sneaked in, so he had a certain understanding of it. For example, the theme park of Frozen. In this park, Shishi can see many scenes from the story that I told you yesterday. Shishi put down the chicken leg in her hand and pouted her oily little mouth. She couldn't help but ask, will Sister Elsa be there too? Although Anna was also the main character in her father's stories, Shishi preferred Elsa, who had magic and could make snowflakes fill the sky. Of course. Yang Yi smiled and said, Aisha is in her ice castle. Wow. Ice snow castle. Cece's big eyes were overflowing with light, full of longing. Yang Yi continued. The Frozen theme park is just one of them. There are many other interesting theme parks, such as Two Big Round Ears, the smart and cute Mickey Mouse, the good-tempered Donald Duck in a sailor suit, and so on. There are many cartoon characters combined to form all kinds of theme parks. Although Shishi had never heard of this before, the little girl was somewhat confused and felt that it was awesome. Her face was full of envy. There's also a small train that runs through the park, humming. You can see a lot of interesting scenes. Yang Yi smiled. Some parks have the sea ships and pirates. Some parks have mountains, active volcanoes that can spew fire. The little girl was completely interested in her father. She was so excited that she twisted her little butt and couldn't sit still. Papa, take Shishi to play, okay? The little girl said coquettishly. Okay. Wait. This. Yang Yi suddenly realized that he seemed to have dug a hole for himself by describing Disneyland to Shishi. In this life, the original Yang Yi had traveled extensively after retiring. He had stayed in many big cities. However, in his memory, there was no amusement park as large and as interesting as Disneyland. The largest amusement park in the country was in Harbor City, but it was just an upgraded and luxurious version of the amusement park in Jiang City. The attractions were almost the same. This is just Papa's idea. There is no such amusement park in the world now. Yang Yi confessed to Shishi honestly. The excited little girl was stunned. After a while, a disappointed expression appeared on Shishi's little face. The little girl pursed her lips. Although she didn't cry, her mood suddenly became low. Yang Yi looked very sad. Shishi's disappointed look made him feel depressed. He didn't know why, but he didn't want Shishi to be disappointed in him, no matter what. Papa should be his daughter's hope and Santa Claus. He should satisfy everything she wanted. How could he let his daughter down? Yang Yi couldn't help but reach out and hold Shishi in his arms. He patted her back gently. The oil on the little girl's claws was smeared on his clothes. Yang Yi was actually a little uncomfortable. He was a Virgo in his previous life, and he had the last stage of obsessive-compulsive disorder. But for Shishi, he resisted his inner entanglement. Not only did he tolerate the little girl making a mess in the house, but he also waited until Shishi fell asleep to clean up. Now he even allowed the little girl to dirty his clothes. There was no other way. How could a father take care of a child and still be clean? Papa, Shishi wants to play. Shishi pouted and said with grievance. Hearing this, Yang Yi impulsively patted his chest and said, Shishi, don't worry. Papa will build you an amusement park in the future, the best amusement park in the world. Perhaps a woman with a little experience would scoff at such a promise and think that Yang Yi was bragging. However, Shishi, who was a few months away from 4 years old, was still very naive. She looked at her father in surprise and asked, Really? Yang Yi was not joking. He nodded seriously and said, Really, Papa must build an amusement park for Shishi. Is there a park for Sister Aisha? Shishi looked at her father's eyes and asked a little nervously. Of course. Yang Yi smiled and said, Shishi has everything that she likes. The little girl's cloudy mood suddenly turned sunny. Her watery eyes curved into crescent moons as she smiled happily. Papa, pinky promise. Shishi stretched out her little finger and said sweetly, You can't lie. Yang Yi could not help but laugh. He stretched out his right little finger with great interest and hooked it with his daughter's slender little finger. Pinky promise, don't change your mind for 100 years. Shishi said very sincerely. Yang Yi smiled faintly. Looking at his daughter who continued to happily gnaw on the chicken leg, there was a voice in his heart that warned him. Don't forget. In the future, you have to build an amusement park for Shishi. A Disney-level park. This was a promise for his daughter. It must be completed. Then again, it seemed that this goal was a bit difficult to achieve. How much money would it take to build a Disneyland from scratch? Take the most recent example. Yang Yi's previous life's Shanghai Disneyland was said to have cost more than 34 billion yuan. Of course, every inch of land in Shanghai was worth gold. Naturally, it couldn't be compared to that. However, even if the burden of land was removed, Yang Yi wanted to build a Disneyland for his daughter. The investment was no less than 10 billion yuan. Even if he could invest with the government or other partners, the dream of building a Disneyland was still a fantasy. Besides, without the successful example of Yang Yi's previous life's Disneyland, who would be willing to invest in Yang Yi? However, Yang Yi was not a person who would give up easily. Moreover, he had experienced rebirth and time travel. Yang Yi did not think that there was anything that he could not do. Wasn't it just a few billion yuan? Now he would set a small goal and earn 100 million yuan from him. Don't worry, a literary life is not a life of money. There will be descriptions of making money and business, but there are very few. Remember, Yang Yi is the big boss behind the scenes. Chapter 9. Jiangqing was a large city, and it was divided into 5 districts and 8 counties. Among them, Wuhu District, where Yang Yi lived, was the LC District. Relatively speaking, there was a lot of resistance to the transformation, which allowed the slums in the city to survive. On the other hand, the newly developed Binhai district, which was connected to the international metropolis of Shanghai, and with Jiangqing's support for the cultural and entertainment industry, it developed rapidly. The housing prices there were almost twice as high as those in Wuhu district, and it became a veritable rich district in Jiangqing. Murphy lived in Binhai district, but she was very busy during this period, and spent most of her time in the company's recording studio. Today, she recorded until 10 at night, and only then did she have to pack up and go home. Sister, have some hot water, I've put some throat-soothing medicine in it. Mo Xiaowan passed the water bottle to her, feeling sorry for her sister. Murphy's cold and elegant face was also filled with tiredness, but she shook her head and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "Wanna give me your phone, I want to call Shishi." Mo Xiaowan reluctantly took out her bag and muttered, "She's having so much fun at her father's place. Why do you still want to call her?" Mo Fei rolled her eyes at her. She didn't have the energy to knock her head. Beep beep. Murphy was calling Yang Yi's phone, which she had bought for Yang Yi. Thinking about it made her angry. That stubborn man still refused to accept it. Mo Xiaowan had been complaining about throwing pearls before swine, because the phone that Murphy had bought for Yang Yi was the best camera phone on the market. Mo Xiaowan couldn't even bear to buy one for herself. However, Yang Yi didn't use that phone much, and he left it at home when he went to work. Sometimes she couldn't even reach him when she called. The phone rang for a while, and finally it was connected. Shishi's clear and cheerful voice came from the phone. "Mom!" Murphy breathed a sigh of relief, and a very gentle smile appeared on her face. This was rare. Murphy used to be called the Ice Queen, because her appearance was very cold, and her emotions were hidden in her heart. Even her fans thought that her smile was rare. "Shishi, why aren't you sleeping?" Murphy asked softly. "I just came back from the amusement park with Papa, and then Shishi took a bath, and Papa is taking a bath." She, like a spy, reported. "Really? Amusement park?" Mo Fei was stunned for a moment. She frowned slightly and said, "Did your Papa take you to the amusement park today?" So Shishi learned her mother's accent. "Yes. It's so fun," Shishi reported happily. "I sat on the Ferris wheel with Papa, and we also saw a big plane." Murphy listened absent-mindedly, and echoed from time to time. She didn't have any opinions about Yang Yi taking Shishi to the amusement park, but she was entangled in a problem. Where did Yang Yi get the money? It should be known that the entrance ticket to the amusement park cost 200 yuan, and Shishi's half ticket cost 300 yuan. Murphy didn't care about this small amount of money, but she didn't think that Yang Yi could take out so much money. Even if Yang Yi was rich, he wouldn't be so poor that he couldn't even afford a decent set of clothes. What was more funny was that Yang Yi was still very stubborn, and he was not willing to help Murphy even when she wanted to. "Papa said that he will build a big amusement park for me." Shishi couldn't wait to help her father claim credit from her mother. "It's very, very big." Mo Xiaowan, who was waiting on the side, heard this sentence. She smiled disdainfully and muttered with a look of disdain. "He really knows how to coax children with flowery words." Murphy's thoughts were different from Mo Xiaowan's. She still had a deep understanding of Yang Yi, and she didn't know why, but she felt that Yang Yi seemed to be a little different. However, Murphy couldn't tell what was different about him. Murphy sighed inwardly, and her emotions were very complicated. She shook her head and came back to her senses, and said to Shishi, "Then, did Shishi have fun with Papa today?" "Of course." Shishi thought of something, pouted, and said unhappily, But Shishi woke up too late today, and I haven't had enough fun yet." Murphy pretended to be very disappointed and asked, "Doesn't Shishi miss Mom? Mama is unhappy." Cece giggled and said cutely, "I miss Mama too. It would be even better if Mama could wake up with me." These words made Murphy's heart feel warm. This little girl seemed to be quite sensible. Maybe it was because children from single-parent families matured early? At this moment, Yang Yi came out of the shower. He took a towel to wipe the water droplets on his head, and asked from afar, "Shishi, who are you talking to?" "I'm talking to Mom on the phone." Shishi stood on the bed barefooted, raised the phone with her two small hands, and responded loudly, "Papa, do you want to talk to Mom?" Yang Yi frowned, and couldn't help but feel a little flustered. He didn't know how to face Murphy. This seemed to be because of his own worries, and also because of the influence of the original Yang Yi's soul imprint. In the original Yang Yi's memory, his feelings for Murphy were very complicated. On one hand, he cared a lot about Murphy, because Murphy was the only woman he had slept with, and moreover, Murphy was the mother of his daughter. On the other hand, Yang Yi rejected Murphy from the bottom of his heart. He felt that there was a great disparity between the two of them, and that they were not a good match. Moreover, Yang Yi himself thought that Murphy was prejudiced against him and looked down on him. These complicated feelings also affected Yang Yi's judgment to a certain extent. He had never seen Murphy, and there was already a grudge between them. Forget it, Dad still has to wash the clothes. You two continue to talk, Yang Yi said to Shishi. In fact, because the room was narrow, Yang Yi's voice also faintly reached Murphy's ears through the phone. Logically speaking, Murphy also didn't want to talk to Yang Yi, okay? The two of them were like fire and water in the past. She was just wondering if she should comply with Shishi's request and say a few words to Yang Yi. In the end, Yang Yi rejected it first. I didn't say no, so why did he reject it? Murphy was almost angered by Yang Yi. Okay, Dad is very busy. Mom, don't be angry. Shishi's soft voice came over, and Murphy's anger dissipated by more than half. She shook her head with a slight wry smile, left Yang Yi behind, and continued to chat with her daughter. Shishi was like a lark, chattering to Murphy about the day's experience. She also told her mother that Dad would tell her a lot of good stories. This bit of information made Murphy's heart feel even more strange. Was this still the dull and clumsy Yang Yi from before? On the way back in the nanny van. Sister. Mo Shaowan called several times before Murphy came back to her senses. Murphy shifted her gaze from the window. Sister, why are you in a daze? Mo Shaowan complained. I'm going over tomorrow's schedule with you. Murphy acted as if she didn't hear Mo Xiaojuan's complaint. She suddenly made a decision. Shaowan, help me postpone the meeting with Teacher Lu tomorrow afternoon for the time being. Mo Shaowan was dumbfounded. She asked in confusion. Why? It's not easy to make an appointment with Teacher Lu. Murphy said firmly. No reason, I'm going to pick up Shishi. Chapter 10. Creak. Clang. The sound of the old iron door broke the silence of the early morning in the apartment. Yang Yi opened the big iron door and walked in from the outside. He was wearing a singlet, and his strong muscles were bulging. His slightly tanned skin was flush with sweat, making it look as if it had been rubbed with olive oil. His hormones were bursting. However, it was a little strange that he was carrying bags of vegetables in his hands. He looked like O'Neill in a flowery dress, and it was very awkward. After entering the house, Yang Yi first poked her head into the bedroom, and saw that Cece was still sleeping soundly on her side on the bed. She only kicked off the quilt, and revealed her little, but that was covered by her underwear. Only then did she let out a sigh of relief. After all, it was a little risky for him to leave the little girl at home while he went to buy vegetables. Whether it was in his previous life or the current one, Yang Yi's work and rest were very regular. Moreover, because he practiced the internal strength that he learned in the assassin camp in his previous life, he only needed less than 5 hours of sleep to maintain his energy. Early in the morning, Yang Yi woke up before dawn. First, he skipped rope and held dumbbells at home for more than an hour. There was no other way. The house was narrow and the equipment was limited. Then he ran to buy vegetables. He didn't dare to delay for too long in the middle. Today Yang Yi didn't prepare a Chinese breakfast for Shishi. He wanted to change his craft, so he carefully made a sandwich that looked simple, but the process was complicated. This sandwich was not the cheap kind that could be bought in a convenience store. Yang Yi was very picky with the ingredients. The toast, cream, bacon, and vegetarian ham were all high-end goods that he bought from the supermarket that specialized in imported goods when he took Shishi to the mall last night. The eggs, lettuce, tomatoes, and so on were also fresh vegetables that he just bought from the market. The bacon, ham, eggs, lettuce, and tomato slices that were fried in butter were placed layer by layer on the triangular toast that was smeared with cream. Then he used the other half of the toast to pick it up. The little guy's mouth was not as big as an adult's. Yang Yi had specially made it thin, especially the toast. Yang Yi had almost cut it into transparent thin slices. After all of them were stacked up and pressed gently, it was only half a finger wide. However, the small quantity didn't mean that they were cutting corners. Every layer was meticulously made thin and fine, ensuring that there was variety and that it was mini. With Yang Yi's culinary skills, the taste of this sandwich, which was rich in ingredients, was definitely not inferior to the ones made by the top chefs in the big hotels. The most direct feeling was that Shishi's face was brimming with happiness as she ate. When the little guy was woken up by his father, he was still a little grumpy. Yang Yi carried the fluffy-haired little fellow to wash up. When they passed by the living room, Shishi saw the sandwiches on the table and thought they were bread that she didn't like. She pursed her lips and was about to cry. However, after she took her first bite, she couldn't stop. "Daddy's sandwiches are so delicious," Shishi shouted with her mouth full. Then, before she finished eating, the little guy took another bite. The delicious and juicy bacon, lettuce, tomatoes, and other fillings seemed to bloom in her mouth. It was so delicious. Shishi didn't even have time to take a sip of her favorite yogurt. "It's so delicious. Papa, Shishi also wants to eat sandwiches tomorrow." When Yang Yi was washing the dishes, Shishi was as happy as a little oriole flying through the forest. She ran over, hugged her father's feet, and said coquettishly, "Okay? Is that okay?" Yang Yi thought for a moment, but shook his head and said regretfully, "Not tomorrow. Your aunt will come to pick you up this afternoon." He added, "When Shishi comes to Daddy's place next time, Daddy will make delicious food for you." It was true. Yang Yi was full of recipes and wanted to show off to his daughter. However, the little girl's mood was a little low. She grabbed her father's trousers, pouted, and said, But why can't Daddy live with Mom and Shishi? Shishi likes to eat Daddy's dishes, and Mom will like it too." Yang Yi paused. He shook his head with a wry smile. He really didn't know how to answer the little girl's words. In silence, Yang Yi finished washing the last bowl in his hand, wiped his hands, squatted down, picked up the little girl, kissed the depressed little girl, and rubbed his nose against her little face. Shishi's skin was as delicate as milk. In the past, Yang Yi also liked to express intimacy with his daughter, but at that time, Yang Yi was not used to shaving every day, and sometimes the little girl would cry out. Fortunately, the current Yang Yi not only brought the character of a Virgo from his previous life, but also cherished his current peerless beauty. Every morning, he shaved his beard clean, and Shishi did not need to be tortured. Yang Yi looked at his daughter's pleading eyes, sighed softly and said, "The situation between Daddy and Mommy is more complicated. Whether we are together or not is not up to your daddy. Of course, your mommy also has her difficulties." Of course, this was just to comfort Shishi. In fact, Yang Yi was not optimistic about his relationship with Murphy. Although he was no longer the inferior and stubborn Yang Yi, would Murphy's opinion of him change? Or from another point of view, could he accept Murphy? What kind of people were the people in the entertainment circle? Yang Yi knew a lot of inside stories in his previous life. Moreover, in the entertainment circle, there were joys and sorrows and cuckoldry. These kinds of things were not rare. Yang Yi might be very interested in music, but what he liked was classical music. He liked songs with meaningful lyrics, and he wasn't a singer who liked to sing. Shishi was quite well behaved. She reached out and hooked her father's neck, kissed him, and comforted him in turn. "Papa, don't be sad. Shishi likes Papa." Yang Yi could not help laughing, and reached out to rub the sensible little girl's head. At around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, someone knocked on the iron gate of Yang Yi's house. Yang Yi, who was lying on the bed, turned over, frowned, and looked at the door. In the morning, he took Shishi out to play, and came back a little late. The little girl was still taking a nap. Yang Yi did not need to take a nap, but who asked the little girl to be so clingy? Fortunately, Shishi was sleeping soundly, and was not woken up. But who on earth came to the door? Yang Yi gently closed the bedroom door, and walked over. The big iron door was opened with a harsh friction sound. Yang Yi was surprised to see a slim white-collar beauty, wearing a pair of toed sunglasses standing outside the door. Although the big sunglasses covered half of the other party's face, there was no doubt that this was a great beauty. Her face was a little thin, but it was not the face of a snake spirit. On the contrary, her chin was a little round, but there was no baby fat version of Lu Yifei's fairy face. With this face, even through the sunglasses, Yang Yi could feel the delicate outline of the other party, and the soft beauty of the lines. Presumably, she would be even more beautiful if she took off the glasses, right? And the other party's figure was not bad. Chapter 11. It had to be said that in this life, Yang Yi was really a decent man. In the fused memories, Yang Yi could see that his predecessor had been single for so many years. The ill-fated relationship with Mo Fei was another matter. Of course, after so many years of retirement, no matter how bad his life was, there were still people chasing after him. After all, he was also a soldier with a great body. Whether it was the waitress in the hotel or the rich ladies in the clubhouse, they all wanted to hook up with Yang Yi. However, not a single leaf touched this fellow's body. The greatest record was when he was working as a security guard in the clubhouse 2 years ago. He was pounced on by a prostitute who was madly in love with him. The other party was naked, but Yang Yi still didn't make a move. He took off his shirt and covered the other party's body, then walked away expressionlessly. Walked away. He really walked away like Lu Xiaohui. However, Lu Xiaohui had a tragic ending. Later, rumors of his erectile dysfunction spread in the clubhouse. Although the predecessor Yang Yi didn't care and didn't hate the prostitute, he did become a laughingstock. But was this body really impotent? Yang Yi didn't think so. Looking at the white-collar beauty's hot body in front of him, his overflowing body couldn't hold it. Looking from the bottom up, first it was wrapped in black stockings and a tube skirt, perfectly round and slender thighs. Then it was indescribable, buttocks. From the tight tube skirt he could see indescribable. Yang Yi's eyes couldn't help but move to the other party's chest, indescribable. He didn't know if it was the real thing or the effect of the underwear, but it was big, 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 indescribable. The white-collar beauty was acutely aware of Yang Yi's unscrupulous gaze. Suddenly, through the sunglasses, a cold chill passed through. He heard her snort. Yang Yi, I haven't seen you for half a month, but your guts have grown a lot. This cold voice was like a bucket of cold water, making Yang Yi come back to his senses. Murphy. Yang Yi was surprised. It was Mo Fei's voice. Yang Yi immediately realized what was going on. Just now he vaguely felt that this face was very familiar. He didn't recognize Murphy just now. After all, in his memory, Murphy wouldn't dress like this. Before Murphy retired from the music industry, with the nickname, Ice Queen of Songs, she dressed very conservatively. Moreover, at that time, she hadn't given birth yet, and her body wasn't so hot. Later, when she met with Yang Yi, every time she brought her daughter to Yang Yi's house, she would be dressed in a trench coat and a scarf, tightly. She was afraid of being photographed by reporters. She had never dressed so provocatively before, okay? Wearing this white-collar suit, there was always a sense of shame like cosplay, okay? Seeing Yang Yi's dumbfounded expression, Murphy actually felt a little proud in her heart. You look down on me, and you don't want to talk to me on the phone. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but when Murphy got out of the car, she left her trench coat in the car, and valiantly stretched out her hand, indescribable, then clattered upstairs in her high heels. Of course, Murphy always hid her emotions very well. After taking off her sunglasses, Yang Yi saw her cold eyes, as if she was 1,000 miles away. Yang Yi frowned, hesitated, and said, "Why are you here?" Then Yang Yi felt that his words were a little too harsh, so he added, "Didn't Mo Xiaowan come to pick up Shishi? And it's so early." However, it was already too late. Murphy didn't hear the rest of the words, but Yang Yi's words made her explode. "What do you mean, why am I here?" Murphy fiercely cut Yang Yi with her eyes. "Can't I come to pick up my daughter?" Yang Yi, however, was a little annoyed by her words. Maybe it was because he couldn't bear to part with Shishi, or maybe it was because of the influence of his predecessor's soul imprint, but his expression turned cold, and he said stiffly, "It's not time yet, right? Didn't we agree that Shishi would only go back at night?" It was a familiar voice, a familiar temper. Murphy's frown loosened slightly. However, this didn't mean that Murphy liked Yang Yi's temper. Hearing Yang Yi's words, Murphy's heart was filled with anger. Ah. What's wrong? Do you dislike seeing me or what? Murphy asked in a bad mood. The sound insulation of the apartment was really bad. Murphy and Yang Yi's quarrel echoed in the stairwell, and there were already a few people who opened the door and stuck their heads out to take a look. Luckily, the lighting in the stairwell wasn't good, and those people who were watching the show didn't see Murphy's face clearly, or else it would be big news. Murphy heard the noise, and her face flushed red. She glared at Yang Yi, who was still blocking the door, and said angrily, "Are you going to let me keep talking to you at the door?" Yang Yi scratched his head, and hurriedly moved aside to let Murphy in. This was his negligence. Although he was very unhappy with Murphy's cold appearance and aggressive tone, he wasn't that petty. Murphy walked past Yang Yi, and the two of them couldn't avoid the friction between their bodies. Yang Yi's nose was sharp enough to smell the fragrance from Murphy's hair, but the most sensitive thing was that when they walked past each other, Murphy and Yang Yi's thigh muscles rubbed against each other. That amazing elasticity made Yang Yi unable to control himself. Indescribable. Murphy didn't notice at first, and she walked in by herself as if she was very familiar with the place. She found a chair and sat down. Her skirt was pressed down, and her legs were slightly tilted to the side. Her posture was very elegant. However, Yang Yi didn't follow her in. After a while, he looked embarrassed as he bent down and stuck his butt out, and walked in close to the wall. Murphy's cold eyes flashed with a trace of astonishment, and then she understood. Her face flushed red, and she spat at Yang Yi in her heart. Yang Yi finally sat down. He raised his head and looked at Murphy. Seeing that she was acting as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't notice, he breathed a sigh of relief. Damn, when did I become so innocent? Yang Yi was a little disappointed at his own performance. Logically speaking, Yang Yi wasn't a good boy when it came to the relationship between men and women in his previous life. He had experienced it before. Why did he behave so unbearably in front of Murphy? These questions weren't tangled up for the time being. After the two of them sat facing each other, they were silent, and couldn't find a topic to talk about. The atmosphere was awkward. Mo Fei, such an iceberg beauty, was almost forced by this strange atmosphere to the point where she could no longer maintain this cold posture. Big blockhead. Murphy was also helpless. She was about to be angered to death by Yang Yi. Her heart was a little sad. You don't welcome me? She felt that Yang Yi was not only a blockhead, but he might also hate her. Otherwise, why would Yang Yi be so obedient to Shishi every time, but be so cold and heartless to her? Obviously, Murphy didn't realize that there was a problem with her. Her height was cold, and she wasn't worse than Yang Yi. But Murphy wasn't good with words, and the two of them couldn't continue the conversation. They stared at each other for a while, until Murphy couldn't help but stand up. I'll go take a look at Shishi, Murphy said angrily. Yang Yi frowned slightly. He didn't know why Murphy always spoke as if she had eaten gunpowder, but he didn't care too much. He nodded and walked in front to open the door for Murphy. After Yang Yi moved aside, Murphy saw Shishi, who was sleeping on the bed. Seeing her daughter, the ice beauty's eyes softened. The little girl liked to kick the blanket. Yang Yi only went out for a while, and the little blanket was kicked to her feet. When Murphy saw this, she thought that Yang Yi neglected to take care of her. She angrily glared at Yang Yi, walked over, and covered Shishi with the blanket. Maybe it was because she had enough sleep. Murphy moved a little, and Shishi opened her eyes in a daze. Mom. The little girl's voice was also hazy. She tenderly stretched out her hands, wanting her mother to hug her. Murphy also missed her daughter very much. She sat on the bed, hugged the little girl in her arms, and the mother and daughter started to talk. Yang Yi leaned on the door frame, somewhat silent. Although this scene was very warm and beautiful, it was very much like the home that Yang Yi dreamed of in his previous life. But he still understood that this was not a home. Murphy was here, and she would still leave, and she would take Shishi with her. Yang Yi's heart was filled with reluctance. Shishi was the first person he saw in this strange world, and also his closest relative who was related to him by blood. In these 2 days, Yang Yi had already gotten used to the little girl's existence, and indulged in the happiness brought by family. If Shishi left with her mother, He was afraid that he would return to that endless loneliness. Chapter 12. Although Shishi was reluctant, and although Yang Yi's face was dark and he did not say a word, Murphy finally steeled her heart and took the little girl back. Mom, let Papa live in our house, okay? Papa can cook delicious food for you. When they went downstairs, Shishi was still in her mother's arms and acted coquettishly. Murphy was annoyed by Yang Yi's attitude. She angrily patted Shishi's butt and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Girls can't be so naughty. Your papa has his own life. He won't be willing to come over." Murphy finally touched the little girl's head and said faintly, "Today Murphy came over." In order not to be followed by the paparazzi, she changed into an inconspicuous private car. After getting in the car, Mo Xiaowan, who was acting as the driver, anxiously turned her head and reported, "Sister, sorry for the trouble." There's a reply from Teacher Lu. He said that Teacher Lu was very dissatisfied with our temporary change of meeting time and has unilaterally cancelled the schedule. Mo Xiaowan said with a frown. This Teacher Lu was Professor Lu Shifeng of the Composition Department of Shanghai Music Academy. In the last century, he had also created a lot of popular works. Now that he was older, he was more active in the entertainment circle as a music critic. Murphy wanted to visit Lu Shifeng in the hope that he could comment on her comeback album. Of course, this was also arranged by the company's public relations department. Giving some money in exchange for a good review. Maybe the sales would increase a little. But Murphy was not interested. Although she was a woman in her early 30s, she was still a mother, and had been in the entertainment circle for many years. Murphy was still very naive. She wanted to win back the honor that belonged to her with her own strength. Therefore, in order to pick up her daughter, Murphy did not care about the cheating trip. Hearing Mo Xiaojuan's words, Murphy frowned and snorted, "Let him be." Mo Xiaowan rolled her eyes at her cousin helplessly. In fact, she faintly felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't persuade Mo Fei, so she could only sigh and turn the car key, start the car and leave. "I like to eat Papa's dishes. In the morning, Papa made sandwiches, and at noon, Papa made delicious chicken wings." Shishi pouted and said unhappily, "Tonight, Papa will still make delicious food, but Shishi won't be able to eat it." That delicate little face had a melancholy look, making people feel that it was both pitiful and funny. "Your father knows how to cook? How is this possible?" Murphy shook her head helplessly. She knew that Yang Yi's culinary skills were not as good as Mo Xiaojuan's. However, she was very serious. She tried her best to promote her father. "Papa is amazing. Papa also knows how to tell stories. He told stories about Sister Aisha. Sister Aisha knows magic." Although Murphy was a little surprised by Shishi's words, she still stubbornly believed that Yang Yi was still the same big block of wood as before. Moreover, compared to pursuing the problem of Yang Yi's ability, she was more concerned about Shishi's attitude. She had only stayed at her father's house for a few days. How could she be captivated by her father? Did she not like her dearest mom anymore? Murphy was really a little jealous of Yang Yi. She felt that her daughter was going to be snatched away by the big bad wolf. "Your papa is not that amazing. He must be bluffing you," Murphy said somewhat angrily. Only in front of her daughter would Murphy show such a cute side. Her originally fairy-like face was now puffed up like a bun. It was very cute. No, Papa didn't lie to Shishi. Shishi was not happy and tried to argue for her father. Papa said that next time, he will take Shishi to ride the Ferris wheel. Hearing this, Mo Fei was stunned for a moment, and then fell into deep self-blame. She loved Shishi very much, but Murphy knew that she was not a qualified mother. She was very busy with work and had been eager to come back, so she had very little time to accompany Shishi. Coupled with her identity, it was destined that it was difficult for her to take Shishi to public places like ordinary people. "No wonder you like to be with your father." Murphy gently held her daughter in her arms and rested her chin on her daughter's hair. She thought with some guilt, "Did I make the wrong choice?" But this thought only flashed through her mind. Murphy was a very strong and persistent person. After returning, she and Shishi went to a restaurant for dinner, and then took the little girl to her recording studio to continue working. She was busy until late at night again. No. In the middle of the night, Murphy, who had just fallen asleep, suddenly woke up. She got up with her clothes in a mess and crawled to Shishi's room. Seeing that Shishi was still sleeping in bed, she breathed a sigh of relief. The dream just now was too strange. Murphy seemed to have returned to the time when she and Yang Yi first met. In the dream, Yang Yi pushed her away and said cruelly, "How good would it be if we didn't start? In this way, you and I won't be involved and entangled with the karma of Shishi." Then, Murphy was swallowed by darkness and could no longer see her lovely daughter. Fortunately, it was just a dream. But Murphy was not sleepy for the time being. She poured herself a glass of red wine, put on a silk nightgown, went to the floating platform in the bedroom, and sat down curled up. Outside the window of the floating platform was the prosperous scene of the Binhai area. Even in the middle of the night, it was still brightly lit, and the traffic was endless. However, Murphy had no time to appreciate it. Her mind was full of bits and pieces from more than 4 years ago. At that time, Murphy was still the ice queen in the music industry. 6 years after her debut, her albums pushed her to the peak of the music industry. Countless fans were intoxicated by her cold and ethereal voice and could not extricate themselves. At that time, Yang Yi, who had been driven out of the army camp, had just begun his new life in the capital. Perhaps it was God's arrangement that they came to the intersection of fate with no intersection at all. At a cocktail party arranged by a sponsor, Murphy was drugged by a scheming boss, and Yang Yi happened to be the boss's driver. Seeing his boss coming down with a beautiful woman in his arms, Yang Yi, who had a strong sense of justice, punched his boss to the ground, and then drove his boss's extended version of Lincoln and fled with Mo Fei. At that time, he did not know that he had saved the famous star Murphy. Of course, Yang Yi did not know about all the stars. If it was just a hero saving a beauty, there might not be a follow-up plot. The problem was that the drug was not strong, and Murphy woke up quickly. After she woke up, she kindly helped Yang Yi, who was thirsty, open a bottle of water in the car. But they did not know that the bottle of water was originally left by the boss for him to use 7 times a night. It was a strong aphrodisiac. Coincidentally, Yang Yi was unlucky enough to be drugged. He was a gentleman. After he realized that something was wrong, he parked the car in the maple forest on the outskirts. With red eyes, he desperately pushed Murphy out. However, in that situation, Murphy was unwilling to leave. She burst into tears and insisted on breaking in. Then, naturally, the indescribable incident of parking in the maple forest happened. The past was like the wind, but it did not blow away. After so many years, it was still fresh. For that time, do you regret it? Mo Fei gently shook the goblet. The red wine inside was as red as blood. She did not know whether she was asking herself or asking Yang Yi this question. However, she knew her answer. Chapter 13. The location of Tingshan District was very good. Just like its name, the lush Tingshan District was located in the middle. At the same time, the winding Jinghang Grand Canal flowed through it. It was backed by mountains and water. Even in terms of feng shui, it was a blessed land. In addition, there was no pollution from industry. The beautiful Tingshan District became another district of Rivertown with tourism, as its main industry other than the East District. Of course, the East District couldn't be compared to Tingshan District because the entertainment industry there was more developed. Under the red lights and green lights, the scenery of the East District always gave people a feeling of impermanence. Tingshan District was much better. 10 years ago, Rivertown built the first university town in the south in Tingshan District around Jiangqing Media University, a famous media college in the country. The strong cultural atmosphere blended with the beautiful natural scenery. It was just right for Yang Yi, a guy who was passionate about literature. After renting a car, Yang Yi spent 2 days walking around Tingshan District. Finally, he took a fancy to a shop near the back door of Jiangqing Media University that was about to be sold. This shop was actually a little remote and desolate. This was because the real bustling area of Jiangqing Media University was the area outside the main entrance and the East District. Because the main entrance was next to Jiangqing Normal University, It was where the popularity of the two schools converged. It wasn't hard to understand why it was bustling. Jiang Chuan's dormitory area was near the East District, so the food and beverage industry outside was more developed. The back door was a little far from the dormitory area. Other than some students from the arts and media colleges who came for classes, there weren't many students who were interested in visiting. Outside the back door was the Jinghang Grand Canal. However, it wasn't the rippling Shijiang River, nor was it the trickling Tingxi stream. Facing the calm Jinghang Grand Canal, and the lack of willows supporting the banks and green grass embankment, the students were always a little disinterested, except for some male and female students who liked to find quiet places to go on dates. However, Yang Yi took a fancy to this place because he liked its silence and seclusion. Why did it have to be so bustling? Yang Yi didn't like to open a coffee shop that he couldn't handle. The best situation was 10 or so customers a day, with 2 or 3 regulars. They would drink coffee elegantly and quietly, or talk about literature and music without restraint. "Are you the owner of this shop?" Yang Yi asked in surprise when he saw the person renting the place on the second floor of the shop. In front of him was a silver-haired but hale and hearty old man. He wore a very traditional Chinese green robe, and his every movement gave people a sense of elegance and wisdom. This made Yang Yi suddenly feel deep veneration. When he spoke, his tone became much more respectful. "Little friend, why do you ask?" The old man smiled gently and asked, "Do you think that I shouldn't be tainted by the stench of money?" Yang Yi's old face was a little embarrassed. The other party's judgment was very accurate. He really did think so. "Haha, this is actually a house given to me by the school. After so many years, only my wife used it to open a small bookstore." When the old man talked about his wife, he looked a little sad. He gently touched the round wooden handrail of the stairs, as if he was reminiscing about something. Yang Yi, who had received special training in the past, was an expert at tricking others. Not long after, he coaxed the old man into telling him the story in his heart. This was a story related to love. The old man's name was Husong Nan. He used to be a professor at the School of Classical Music of Jiang City Media University. His wife used to be an editor at a publishing house in the capital. Later, in order to come to Jiang City to reunite with her husband, she resigned and opened a small bookstore. The two of them were in harmony and helped each other in difficult times for decades. Their days were peaceful and happy. Until 8 years ago, when the old grandma fell ill and passed away. The old man Husong Nan was the only one left in this small building. It was not that his children were unfilial. Husong Nan's children had all gone to Harbor City to develop. They had always wanted to take the old man over. But the old man was reluctant to leave this place because every brick and tile of this small building was filled with his memories of his wife. Now that the old man had retired, and with the pleas of his grandchildren, he also had plans to go over and enjoy his remaining years. However, what I can't let go of the most is still this. Husong Nan's eyes regained their wisdom, and he gently patted the handrail of the stairs. "I want to find someone who can take care of it well." The old man didn't want anyone to destroy this place and this small building. If there was time in the future, the old man still hoped to come back and have a look. At least, it would be a memory. However, this was a bit of a headache for Yang Yi. Obviously, it wasn't so easy to meet the old man's requirements. The old man didn't list out a standard at all. Whether it worked or not, it all depended on his mouth. To be honest, Yang Yi really hoped to meet a Philistine. At least, the problems that could be solved with money were not problems. However, Yang Yi still wanted to fight for it, because this small bluestone building was really artistic from the appearance and the surrounding environment. He liked it very much. Yang Yi was silent for a moment and said his thoughts truthfully. "I will rent your house. The second floor will be for myself, and then the first floor will be used to open a coffee shop. Your bookshelves can be left behind." In Yang Yi's description, the bookshelves left by the old man would be rearranged by Yang Yi to build a coffee shop full of the fragrance of books. The old man looked at Yang Yi with interest and smiled slightly. "Open a coffee shop here? That's not a good idea, you might lose money." Yang Yi didn't care and said, "It doesn't matter if I lose money or not, it's just my dream. Moreover, it's better if it's quiet." In my free time, I can write books and listen to music. He didn't think much of it, but the old man showed a strange expression. The style was not right. Yang Yi was an 8 feet tall man, with coiled muscles, strong and brave, and under the influence of the soul imprint of his predecessor, he still inadvertently carried the shadow of a soldier when he walked or sat. And this kind of guy said that he liked to listen to music and play with literature? Anyone would feel uncomfortable. But the old man didn't raise any questions, because Yang Yi's calm expression made him feel a little different. Can I ask, what name do you want your coffee shop to be named? The old man asked curiously. Yang Yi's description before actually made Hu Songnen a little moved. In these few months, he had come in contact with people who had the same idea as him. Yang Yi already had his own idea. He simply said, the coffee shop at the corner of the street. The old man thought that he had misheard and asked Yang Yi to repeat it. After confirming that the coffee shop at the corner of the street was indeed the name that Yang Yi thought of, he frowned and thought for a long time. Sorry, I can't think of any classical story that this name came from. Little friend, can you tell me? The old man humbly asked. It would be a miracle if he could think of it. It's from a song that I wrote. Yang Yi said shamelessly, plagiarizing songs from his previous life. He didn't have any psychological burden as he didn't have any legal awareness. Oh, is that so? The old man said excitedly. A song that you wrote? What's the name? The old man taught music. Although he was a retired classical music professor, he wasn't uninterested in pop music. When talking about music, his interest rose. Yang Yi didn't directly answer. He looked at the wall next to him. There was a simple-looking guitar hanging on it and asked, "Excuse me, can I borrow your guitar? I'll sing it for you." What's this song? Do you know what it is? Chapter 14. Yang Yi's request was very abrupt. The old man looked at Yang Yi's bronze-colored muscles with a strange expression. They were sturdy and firm. This kind of guy can play the guitar? The old man's mind was filled with an incongruous image of a cow chewing on a peony. You can try. Hu Songnen nodded his head with self-restraint. He did not refuse because of his own prejudice. Yang Yi took down the guitar and sat on the chair opposite the old man. The guitar was placed on his right foot. He gently plucked the strings and tested the sound. Buzz. A very deep and thick bass sound was clearly transmitted through the resonance of the guitar case. Yang Yi's ears moved slightly. His expression became a little surprised. Then he tried a few notes. Professor Hu, your guitar is not ordinary. Yang Yi finally raised his head and said to the old man with a little surprise. Hu Songnen was stunned. His hand trembled and pointed to a beetle-like carving at the end of the guitar case. He asked in disbelief, "You don't recognize this logo? Could it be some famous brand?" Yang Yi looked at it and shook his head. Of course he didn't recognize it. The musical instrument brands in his previous life did not exist in this world. But the musical instrument brands in this life? What a joke. He didn't even study for a few years. It would be strange if he could recognize the predecessor without any musical talent. The old man almost rolled his eyes. He helplessly gasped for breath. Only then was he able to calm down this depression. Brown Beetle, this is an old factory in Germany. It was a limited classical guitar produced in 1970. The old man blew his beard and stared at Yang Yi as he explained. This old man, I spent a lot of effort to buy it from a businessman. While listening to Hu Songnan's description, it seemed to be very powerful. It felt like the guitar world's Steinway. However, Yang Yi also liked to play the folk guitar in his previous life. Therefore the classical guitar, known as one of the 3 major instruments in the world, Yang Yi did not have a deep feeling about it. Besides, compared to the guitar, Yang Yi preferred the violin. That was his favorite. Pour a glass of red wine, light a candle, play the violin alone, and become a pair of shadows. The topic was a little too far. Yang Yi could not deny it and began his performance. When the broken guitar strings converged into a low and melodious prelude, Hu Songnan, who was looking at Yang Yi curiously, slightly frowned. This melody? He had never heard of it. This was normal. After all, Hu Songnan taught classical music. He may not be able to teach pop music. However, Yang Yi's performance already gave him a different feeling. It was very beautiful, very smooth. It did not seem like an unknown person's game work. The old man's body leaned forward slightly, and he listened carefully. The slightly sad melody lasted for more than 10 seconds, gradually opening the curtain. Yang Yi's fingers gently hooked the strings and began to sing. I came to your city, walking the way you came. Yes, it was Isen's long time not seeing you. A song that Yang Yi liked very much in his previous life. Of course, Yang Yi's voice could not be like Isen's. When it was low, it could still maintain a very empty magnetism. However, the texture of Yang Yi's voice was not bad. His low voice was very deep and had an inexplicable influence. It spread the sadness in the listener's heart. Imagining the days without me, how lonely you would be. The melody at the beginning was still very plain, but the old man listened very carefully. Finally, the mood of the song ushered in a small explosion. Holding the picture you gave me, it was a familiar street. Just without your picture, we can't go back to that day. Yang Yi sang very affectionately. Unknowingly, he brought in the original Yang Yi, the complicated emotions when facing Murphy. However, he didn't notice that the old man sitting opposite him was trembling slightly. The lyrics of Just Without Your Picture seemed to bring back the old man's nostalgic memories. Will you suddenly appear at the coffee shop on the corner, with a smiling face? I'll wave and exchange greetings, sit and chat with you. Yang Yi finally sang the origin of his coffee shop's name, but it was not enough to attract the old man's attention. The lyrics that touched him from time to time, the melody that seemed to dye the air blue. The old man's eyes moistened. In the haze, he seemed to see his wife in front of the flower bed that had not yet withered. She raised her head, waved at him shakily, and smiled at him. I want to meet you so much. Look at how you've changed recently, no longer talking about the past, just exchanging greetings, just saying a word to you, just saying a word, long time no see. In his previous life, Yang Yi did not understand love, and in this life, his predecessor did not understand either. However, for some reason when he sang this song, his mind was full of Murphy's back. He did not know why, but when he sang this song, his emotions were rolling. Especially when he sang the second time, he almost burst into tears and almost could not extricate himself. Damn it, he did not want to say long time no see to anyone. If there was anyone, then she could barely be counted as one. But it was not to the point of falling in love. Bastard. When did he become so sentimental? Yang Yi lowered his head and closed his eyes. His hands were still plucking the strings, and when he finished playing the faint ending, he despised himself fiercely in his heart. When Yang Yi raised his head, he saw the old man rubbing his eyes in a panic and sorting out his emotions. Unlike Yang Yi, whose emotions fluctuated but quickly returned to normal, the old man did not hide his sadness so easily. However, he was a bit concerned about his face. Perhaps it was because as a teacher, he was used to protecting his dignity. His wife still hoped that he could live a happy old age with his children and grandchildren. Then, he would ask the person appointed by his wife to take good care of this little house that carried the past. 8 years, long time no see. How many more years? When can we meet again? Perhaps, not long. Chapter 15. Just like that, Yang Yi became old master Hu Songnan's new tenant without knowing anything. To Yang Yi's surprise, the old man only charged him 1 yuan for 3 years' rent. The stacks of cash in the trunk of Yang Yi's car didn't even come in handy. Even if Yang Yi wanted to give the old man money, he felt bad about it. However, the old man reprimanded him. I'm not short of money. My son runs a record company in Harbor City. He can support an old man like me with that money. You take care of this house for me and take care of her. It's more practical than any amount of money you can give me. Hu Songnan had sorted out his sadness and was ready to leave tomorrow without any sentimental attachment. Would you like me to send you off? Yang Yi didn't know why, but he felt inexplicably sad and said, No, it's not like I can't walk anymore. Take the key. After tomorrow, this place will be yours. The old man was stubborn like a bull. Well, Yang Yi didn't argue and agreed. It seemed that he was shouldering another person's wish. In the evening, in order to celebrate, Yang Yi prepared beer-fried ribs with fresh orange juice that he squeezed himself for dinner. He didn't need to eat rice at all. He could watch TV and eat the meat directly. This was the advantage of being single. Freedom was faith. However, Yang Yi just raised 3 fingers of faith and took a sip of the orange juice. He couldn't help but think of his daughter. If she was here, she would definitely like to drink this orange juice, right? And the ribs, the meat inside is very fragrant. She would definitely like to eat it. Yang Yi couldn't help but imagine the image of the little guy gnawing on a fragrant rib, and he couldn't help but reveal a smile at the corner of his mouth. No, didn't he say that he wanted to breathe the air of freedom? Why did he think of his daughter again? Before Yang Yi could figure out the reason, a news broadcast on the pitifully small old-fashioned television caught his attention. A few days ago, the famous musician teacher Lu Shifeng, who once composed Daughters of the Great River and the nation's broken mountains and rivers, accused Murphy of being domineering and disrespectful to her elders on an interview program, which caused a huge uproar. Murphy. When Yang Yi heard this familiar name, he raised his head in surprise. Was it Shishi's mother? The news quoted the recording of that interview. In the video, the old man with the Mediterranean hairstyle was shouting and spittle flying everywhere. You can't forget your roots. No matter if you're a celebrity or a big shot, the more popular you are, the more humble you have to be. You have to show respect to your seniors. Otherwise, you won't be able to stay in the entertainment industry for long. I'll give you a few typical examples. Do you still remember the famous Murphy from a few years ago? In the past, before she debuted as her senior, I gave her a lot of pointers so that she wouldn't take many detours. But this woman is an ingrate. After she became famous, she turned her back on me. Saying that she has a cold personality is just a compliment from the media. In my opinion, she's just too arrogant. At that time, I thought that she wouldn't be popular for long. Sure enough, there's reincarnation in heaven. The old man with the Mediterranean hairstyle said triumphantly. Yang Yi frowned. From the other party's description, he could basically confirm that it was Shishi's mother, the big star who was as cold as ice. However, Lu Shifeng's words made Yang Yi very uncomfortable. On TV, he was still talking at length. What kind of comeback is she doing recently? She wants others to support her, so she asked her assistant to send her new album to me. She doesn't even have the sincerity to visit me. What kind of person does she think I am? Here, I hope that the fans who like Murphy can open their eyes and recognize what kind of person your favorite star is. At this time, the host also played the fool. Then, Teacher Lu, what do you think of Murphy's comeback album? Lu Shifeng couldn't wait to wave her hand and shouted. The new song is terrible, and it's mixed with a lot of old songs. I really don't understand whether she wants to release a new album or a new bottle of old wine. So for such an insincere album, I don't recommend fans to buy it. There was nothing new at the end of the news. It was just a summary and analysis of Murphy's situation. However, Yang Yi frowned. Lu Shifeng, what is this old man doing? Although Yang Yi didn't know anything about the situation of the entertainment industry in this world, he could still analyze a strong sense of malice from the other party's words. Is he deliberately slandering Murphy? Yang Yi secretly thought. At this time, the TV was only broadcasting the news. As early as yesterday, after Lu Shifeng's program was broadcast on the TV station, Murphy's company was informed of the news. However, by the time the public relations department took action, it was already too late. In this era of underdeveloped social networks, the channels for people to get news were nothing more than TV and newspapers. Only a small number of senior netizens would exchange information on online forums. Therefore, after the TV program, Murphy's image was immediately greatly affected. This impact was very difficult to recover. How could you cancel this trip? Don't you know that this Lu guy will take revenge for the smallest grievance? The company worked so hard to arrange an event for you and you didn't even accept it. Do you still want to make a comeback? Do you know how passive we are now? In the afternoon, Murphy was scolded by the general manager of the agency, Neil Meiling, who rushed back from Yangcheng. Nyo Myling, known as Sister Ling, was the big sister of the agency world. She was Murphy's benefactor. Back then, Mo Fei's debut didn't go smoothly. It was Sister Ling who saw her potential and pulled her out of the fire pit. After coming to this agency, Missouri Fei's luck changed and she became popular. Therefore, Sister Ling's scolding made Murphy so uncomfortable that she couldn't eat dinner. "Mom, don't be unhappy." She came with Auntie Shaowan to pick up her mother from work. She pouted her little mouth and obediently held her mother's hand and said, She won't talk back to Mom. She will go to kindergarten obediently, okay?" It turned out that the little girl thought that her mother was sulking because she had discussed with her yesterday about sending her to kindergarten, but was refused by her crying and making a fuss. Murphy's mood was very low. Not only was she angry because of Lu Shifeng's words, but she was also under a lot of pressure because her unreleased new album was covered with a layer of shadow. She forced a smile and rubbed Shishi's little head. She didn't say anything and just looked out of the car window gloomily. Ring, ring, ring. Mo Fei's phone suddenly rang, waking her up from her chaotic thoughts. She curiously poked her head out and glanced at it. She suddenly became happy. "It's Papa." Papa called Shishi. Murphy was still in a trance, but she was awakened by Shishi's words. "Yangi, he's going to call me." Chapter 16. Murphy had a special premonition that Yang Yi was calling her, but Shishi snatched the phone first. After connecting the phone, the little girl mischievously imitated her mother's tone. "Hello, Yang Yi, what are you looking for me for?" Not to mention, the way she spoke was still vivid, but her voice could not be changed. It was still a sweet little child's voice, which was immediately seen through by her father. "Shishi. No, I'm Mom." The little girl was still pretending, but she gave herself away. "Shishi, Dad can hear it." On the other side of the phone, Yang Yi helplessly said. Shishi was amused by herself. She giggled and said, "Ah, Papa, how did you hear it?" The little girl did not wait for her father to explain and chirped. "Papa, Shishi misses you so much. Do you miss Shishi?" Her voice was so sweet that Yang Yi could not help but reveal a trace of a smile. He said, "Of course. Hee, Papa, Shishi will go to your house to play this weekend, okay? Shishi has drawn a lot of beautiful paintings. I want to show you." The little girl's chatterbox started, and could not stop at all. "Ahem, Shishi, give the phone to your mother." Yang Yi had no choice but to interrupt the little girl. "Oh," Shishi pouted and unhappily cried. "Papa, you don't like Shishi anymore. You don't talk to Shishi. Dad has something to tell your mother." "Good girl, give the phone to your mother." Yang Yi had a headache. The child's mood was really unpredictable, and he did not know how to comfort her. After a while, Murphy took the phone from the unwilling Shishi. She frowned slightly and said in a very cold tone, "Are you looking for me?" Because of her work, she was very upset. However, Yang Yi felt an inexplicable anger when he heard this tone. "I saw it on TV. It seems like someone is trying to smear your reputation?" Yang Yi still held back, but his tone was a little stiff as he asked, "Is it true?" Yang Yi's concern warmed Murphy's heart. However, she didn't want Yang Yi to get involved in the entertainment industry's messy affairs. This was because she knew that Yang Yi had always disliked the entertainment industry. Being strong and stubborn, she was willing to shoulder all her troubles on her own shoulders. However, Murphy wanted to comfort Yang Yi and tell him not to worry too much, but for some reason, she changed her mind. "So what? It's none of your business." Yang Yi felt like smashing his phone when he heard that, as if she was his enemy. Damn it, good intentions are not rewarded. It's like Lu Dongbin being bitten by a dog. "You're Shishi's mother." Yang Yi was so angry that he sneered and said in an unfriendly tone, "That's why I want to help you." How to help? Of course, he would use Yang Yi's methods to scare her. If that didn't work, he would directly make her disappear from the face of the earth. Yang Yi, who had not completely integrated into the life of a normal person, still retained the thought of using violence to solve problems in the past. However, Murphy misunderstood. Yang Yi had talked to her about similar issues before, so she said angrily, "Okay, I don't need your hypocritical concern. No matter how much people despise me, I won't quit the music industry. Do you understand? After saying that, Murphy slammed the button and ended the call. Then, she sat there in silence with a frosty expression. She still wants to talk to Papa. Cece widened her big watery eyes and cried out in surprise. She was just angry with her father just now. A child's temper came and went quickly, and it had long disappeared. Murphy was so angry that her plump chest violently heaved. However, when facing she still did not force her anger on her daughter. She gently rubbed the little girl's head and sighed. Mom will send you to play with Dad on the weekend. Mom doesn't want to talk to your dad now. Okay then. She was quite well behaved. Seeing her mom's tired face, she stepped on the seat and stood up. She used her little fist to pound Murphy's shoulder. Mom, I'll give you a massage. Thank you, she is so obedient. Murphy patted the little girl's head with gratification. However, on the other side, Yang Yi was inexplicably provoked by Murphy's temper. What the hell? Yang Yi directly threw the phone to the side and drank 2 mouthfuls of orange juice to calm down. If it weren't for Shishi's face, I wouldn't be willing to help you even if you gave me 2 million yuan. Now that you shamelessly want to help me, you're still angry at me? Yang Yi did not remember that his predecessor stubbornly wanted Murphy to leave the entertainment circle and live a hard life with him. During the month when they reunited, there were many conflicts because of this issue. No wonder Murphy subconsciously thought that Yang Yi felt that the entertainment circle was a mess and wanted her to quit. But with Yang Yi's arrogant character, whether in his previous life or his predecessor, he would not consider whether he said something wrong from Murphy's point of view. This woman is so hard to please. Yang Yi simply ignored her. He was also influenced by his predecessor's thinking and felt that Murphy really despised him. She despised him for his rural background, his low job, and his lack of money. Otherwise, why would she say something like, "It's none of your business"? Although he was not the same as before, Yang Yi felt the same and was very unhappy. Looking down on me? I'm the one looking down on you. Forget it. I don't want to think about her. Yang Yi happily gnawed on the slightly cold ribs and thought about his own matters. Of course, the coffee shop needed to be renovated, but it did not need to be too troublesome, because he did not intend to make a modern-style coffee shop. The retro architectural style of the small building was already very much in line with Yang Yi's expectations. Yang Yi planned to use a month to buy some special decorations, lights and chairs and redecorate it. Of course, there were also coffee beans that the coffee shop needed. Yang Yi understood that the coffee beans in this world were basically similar to the coffee beans in his previous life, so he had to take some time to go to Shanghai and buy some top-grade coffee beans. Top-grade coffee beans were expensive? Of course, they were very expensive. But money could not buy a good thing. Yang Yi felt that even if he could not sell it, it was worth it for him to drink it. Of course, there would also be ordinary coffee beans, which Yang Yi would buy back on the way. At that time, ordinary customers would give him ordinary coffee. If he met a fated person or someone with similar interests, he would naturally treat him to the best coffee, and it would be free. Besides the coffee shop, Old Master Hu Songnen also reminded Yang Yi of something today. Remember to register the copyright of the song. Register the copyright? Yang Yi did not care too much at first, but under Old Master Hu's repeated reminders, he took it to heart. It was also because the predecessor did not care about this. Before Yang Yi returned, he specially went to the internet cafe to check the relevant information. It really surprised him. Why is the copyright awareness in this world so strong? Not only songs but also books, inventions and so on. As long as it was created by people, it could be registered on the Copyright Association's website. Once the registration was successful, the copyright would be confirmed, and others would have to pay the copyright fee if they used it. Rampant piracy? Rampant sharing of resources on the internet? Such chaos in his previous life did not exist in this world at all. On one hand, people had developed the awareness of respecting copyright. On the other hand, the rich and powerful Copyright Association kept a close watch. Once such a phenomenon occurred, the relevant personnel would not be able to bear the responsibility of violating the rules. Of course, correspondingly, the price of authentic records and books would not be very high, and ordinary people could afford to buy them. But low profits did not mean low income, because everyone pursued the authentic version. Creators who were popular in the market could even be on the rich list. This seems to be a good way to earn money? Yang Yi was interested. He originally wanted to spend the 2 million yuan and then earn the hard work fee for heaven's justice, but Yang Yi rejected it from the bottom of his heart. It was not easy to have a normal life, and he wanted to draw a clear line with his previous life. Chapter 17. Time always passed quickly when you were busy. In the blink of an eye, a few days had passed and it was the weekend again. Yang Yi had not seen his daughter for 2 weeks. When Murphy called, Yang Yi was sweating profusely as he moved the bookshelves in the small building. He had already put away the few remaining books in a box on the second floor for the old man. Yang Yi had his own arrangement and plans for these bookshelves. Some of the bookshelves would naturally be filled with books that Yang Yi found interesting and thoughtful. For some of the bookshelves, Yang Yi planned to buy some handicrafts or some wooden carvings that he carved himself. This was a hobby that he had left behind from his boring training in the jungle. The simple and unadorned wooden bookshelves were displayed against the wall in a picturesque disorder. Coupled with the warm lighting, it was enough to create a very cultural atmosphere in the coffee shop. But Mo Fei's exasperated question immediately broke the awkward atmosphere. Yang, where the hell have you been all this time? Didn't we agree that I would send my daughter over today? Do you know that I still have work in the afternoon? Yang Yi froze for a moment. He looked at the time on his phone and was speechless. What time is it? Murphy did tell Yang Yi yesterday that she was going to send Shishi over, but the problem was that she used to arrive in the afternoon. Therefore, Yang Yi had nothing to do in the morning. After practicing martial arts in the morning, he came over to tidy up his coffee shop and planned to go back in the afternoon. Who knew that Murphy would come so early? Okay, I'll come back now. Yang Yi did not want to argue with Murphy over such a small matter. After hanging up the phone, he rushed back. Murphy was very angry. She was actually very busy. In order to save her image, Sister Ling had arranged a lot of work for her. Yesterday, she recorded until 3 in the morning. This afternoon, she still had a clothing brand event to attend. She could have asked Mo Shaowan to send Shishi over. However, when she thought about her attitude towards Yang Yi that day, she later calmed down and realized that she might have misunderstood Yang Yi. It was too late for regrets. However, she could not put down her face and apologize. Murphy decided to personally come over. For this, she even put on some light makeup to hide her tiredness. She even picked out a set of clothes for half an hour. Putting aside how she wanted to dress up beautifully to see Yang Yi, she held Shishi's small hand and nervously went to the door of Yang Yi's humble home. When she saw General Tai at the door, Murphy's exploded. The suspicious nature of a Scorpio was triggered, and Mo Fei was still thinking about the worst-case scenario. Went to live with another woman? He didn't want Shishi, and forget it, he didn't want Shishi anymore? That was why the scene on the phone just now happened. However, when Murphy saw Yang Yi appear at the stairs with a dirty face and a sweaty back, Murphy's anger, grievance, and suspicion disappeared. Even her cold face seemed to melt a little. Papa! Shishi was very happy to see her father. She didn't care that her father was dirty. She pounced on him and wanted to hug her father. However, Murphy was a little bit of a clean freak. Shishi was wearing a clean white dress. She quickly pulled the little guy back. However, she paused for a moment. She opened her red lips and asked in a rare gentle voice, "Why didn't you say you went to work?" Her doubts about Yang Yi just now melted into deep guilt. However, Murphy's tone made Yang Yi feel uncomfortable. He looked at Murphy strangely and said lazily, "Work? I didn't go to work." Indeed, he didn't go to work. He hadn't been working as a security guard in the hotel for many days. He didn't even want to resign. However, Mo Fei believed it. She even imagined the scene of Yang Yi moving bricks in the construction site. After all, Yang Yi was really covered with a lot of dust from head to toe. This man was also working hard to make money for Shishi. Suddenly, she felt an indescribable pain in her heart. Yang Yi didn't think too much about it. He smiled and bumped fists with Cece, who was bouncing around. making the little girl so happy that she made a funny face. After opening the door and letting Murphy and Shishi in, Yang-yi glanced at the black mud mark he left on the tiles at the door when he came in. He couldn't help but frown. He wanted to pick up a rag and carefully wipe it clean. However, in front of Murphy and the others, Yang-yi didn't intend to show too much concern, because his predecessor didn't have such a serious obsessive-compulsive disorder. However, he couldn't help looking at his sticky and dirty appearance. After saying this, he hurriedly took a change of clothes and got into the narrow bathroom. "Take a seat first. I'll take a shower." Murphy actually intended to leave after sending Shishi. Mo Xiaojuan's car was still waiting downstairs. However, she looked at Yang Yi's back and opened her mouth, but didn't make a sound. Yang Yi was taking a shower. The small plastic door couldn't block the sound of the water at all. The sound made Murphy's face flush. She didn't even pay attention to Shishi's chattering. "Papa is going to make delicious food for Shishi." The little guy was still very excited. However, when she saw that her mother ignored her, Shishi ran around looking for toys to play with. Not to mention, she also found a duckling that Yang Yi had practiced carving before and played with it happily. Murphy was embarrassed. Listening to the sound of water, she couldn't help but think of Yang Yi's strong back. Although this memory from 4 years ago was very distant. In order to divert her attention, she carefully looked at Yang Yi's residence. This was the first time she looked at this small house seriously. In the past, she felt very depressed and didn't want to sit with the old-fashioned Yang Yi for a moment. But now Murphy was a little surprised. She saw that Yang Yi's residence was actually not bad. Things were neatly arranged. More importantly, the house was spotless and the kitchen was clean. Even Murphy, who was a little bit of a neat freak, couldn't find anything wrong with it. Although it was still very small, too small. All the rooms added together were not as big as her living room. Moreover, the ventilation, soundproofing and other conditions were still unacceptable to her. However, Murphy glanced at Shishi, who was kneeling on the sofa and playing with the duckling. She had a special feeling. There was the smell of home here. It was very warm. However, before she could figure out the source of her emotions, Yang Yi had already come out of the bathroom. Wearing a tight vest and shorts, Yang Yi casually appeared in front of her. Yang Yi was 1.87 meters tall. Sitting on the sofa, Murphy looked up at him and felt a strong impact. What was even more visually impactful was Yang Yi's chest muscles, which were bulging out of his vest, and his abdominal muscles, which couldn't be covered at all. They were directly printed in the shape of an inverted triangle under the vest. The moist water vapor covered Yang Yi's bronze-colored muscles with a layer of delicate luster. The strong smell of hormones almost enveloped Murphy. What are you doing?" Murphy's cold and elegant face floated with red clouds, and she asked nervously, "What am I doing?" Yang Yi played with his wet hair and looked at Murphy in confusion. What else could he do? But he didn't say anything. Murphy's face turned even redder, like a bright red rose blooming after an iceberg melted. There was a hint of charm in the strong feelings. Yang Yi was afraid of an awkward silence, so he racked his brains to find a topic. "Didn't you say you were going to work? This is really going to be awkward." Chapter 18. What did he mean by that? Did he want to chase her away after sitting down for such a short time? Just how impatient was he? Yang Yi's words made Murphy's expression turn cold, which completely covered up the disappointment and grievance in her heart. She stood up and looked at Yang Yi with her calm eyes. Although she was a head shorter than Yang Yi, her aura gradually suppressed Yang Yi. At this moment, the Ice Mountain goddess revealed her usual cold and aloof side. "All right, I should go," Murphy said indifferently. "Take good care of my daughter." Cece heard the commotion and hurriedly raised her little head. She pouted her little mouth and said unhappily, "Mommy, you're lying. You said you wanted to eat with Cece." Mo Fei looked at her daughter, and the tenderness in her eyes gradually recovered a little. She reached out to touch the little girl's nose, forced a smile, and said, "Mommy still has a lot of work. You have to be good at your daddy's house." She sullenly puffed up her cheeks and unwillingly turned her head away. "Don't worry, I can take good care of her." Yang Yi waved his hand and said confidently, After being provoked by Yang Yi, Murphy was not in the mood to coax her daughter. She did not waste any time and turned around to leave with her bag. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment, but he still followed her to the door. However, after Murphy went out and walked to the place where she saw Yang Yi appear from the staircase, the mixed feelings from before surged into her heart. She secretly sighed in her heart and turned around. Facing Yang Yi's surprised gaze, Mo Fei took out her wallet from her bag, unzipped it, and didn't count it. There was at least 10,000 yuan in cash inside. She took out all of it and handed it to Yang Yi. What's the meaning of this? Yang Yi did not take it. He frowned and asked, Take it. She will be here for the next few days. Take her to eat something good. Murphy pursed her lips and said stiffly, obviously, she would not be able to spend so much money to stay at Yang Yi's place for 2 days. However, Yang Yi did not appreciate it. He even felt awkward when he saw Murphy give him money. Not to mention this life, even in his previous life, he had never accepted a single cent from a woman. Moreover, when it came to money, Yang Yi had nearly 2 million yuan in his luggage under his bed. Why would he take a woman's money? No, I don't want it. I'm not a freeloader. Yang Yi retracted his hand. Mo Fei was so angry that she almost fainted. Her full chest heaved up and down violently, and her white upper teeth bit on her bright red lips as she said word by word, This is for you to take care of Cici. She knew that this fellow was a stubborn bull. That was why she used Shishi as an excuse to give him money. However, who knew that this fellow's self-esteem was still so strong? He was so poor that he still cared about his face? I have money, Yang Yi said matter-of-factly. He even repeated himself, afraid that Murphy would not believe him. I really have money. If it was not for the fact that it was difficult to explain the source of 2 million yen, Yang Yi really wanted to use it to prove his innocence. However, how could Murphy believe him? Her mind was filled with the impression of Yang Yi carrying bricks and using the money he earned from his hard work to squander for Cici. She had to admit that it was quite touching. Although they argued for a while, in the end, Murphy still could not give the money to Yang Yi. She was so angry with Yang Yi that her whole body trembled. She shook her head and left. There was a deep gap between Yang Yi and Murphy. However, perhaps because of the prejudice in the beginning, Yang Yi did not have the intention to reconcile with Murphy. After sending Murphy off, he could not wait to go home. Shishi was the treasure in his heart. At noon, of course, Yang Yi cooked delicious food for Shishi. Fragrant, smooth, and juicy crystal vegetable dumplings with meat filling. After biting open the thin layer of tender cabbage, there were mushrooms and pork. The delicate meat filling made the little girl, who did not like vegetables very much, have a big appetite. After a simple lunch break, Yang Yi took Shishi to the small building of the coffee shop. In the future, Dad will move here. Yang Yi excitedly showed off his treasures to his daughter, just like a child who had not grown up. Shishi, do you think it is beautiful here? In fact, Shishi had not played outdoors with her mother for a long time. She was very happy when she came here. She carefully lifted her white little skirt and stepped on the small crystal sandals to play on the green grass in front of the small building. The little girl's bell-like laughter was like a butterfly dancing in the flowers, leisurely in the spring breeze, decorating the beautiful scenery. Hearing her father's words, the little girl ran over a little excitedly. She blinked her big eyes full of expectation. Really? Papa, will this be Papa's home in the future? Yang Yi smiled, reached out to rub Shishi's soft black hair, and corrected her. It's our home, Papa, and Shishi's home. What about Mom? Can Mama live here too? Shishi pointed to the flower bed in full bloom outside and said innocently, Mom likes flowers very much. If she can see flowers every day, she won't be so fierce. Yang Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked at Shishi's expectant face and his heart softened. Of course, if she wants to. Yang Yi did not think that Mo Fei would be willing to live here. Not to mention the fact that the two of them were like fire and water. Mo Fei's obsession with her career as a singer was more suitable for her development in Binhai, where the entertainment industry was more developed. Moreover, from the perspective of living in Binhai district was far more convenient than in Tingshan district. In the future, Murphy would inevitably fly around every day. Binhai district had its own large airport to fly to all parts of the country, but Tingshan district did not even have a basic train station. Of course, Yang Yi did not dislike Murphy at all. If she wanted to come, Yang Yi would not mind. The small Western-style house that his grandfather rented to him was actually not small. Excluding the flower bed at the door, in fact, it was originally a yard, but the wall was removed. It covered an area of more than 300 square meters. Moreover, Yang Yi did not intend to make some space on the second floor for business. With such a spacious house, there was no need to be afraid that there would not be a room for Murphy to live in. Cece's mood became brighter and happier because of her father's words. After she asked Yang Yi to carry her, she kissed her father's face sweetly and said, "Papa, you're so nice." What did he do? He was actually praised by his daughter. Moreover, he was also rewarded with a soft kiss by his daughter. Yang Yi was a little speechless. It was a bit like he had to go back to kindergarten to get a little red flower after he had made a name for himself in the assassin world. It felt very strange. However, for Yang Yi, this was actually quite useful. His daughter's reward made this guy overjoyed, and a smile appeared on his tough face. This was a proud smile, without any concealment. "Let's go. Papa will take you to pick your room." Yang Yi shook the key in his hand and laughed boldly. "As long as you like, Shishi, you can live in any room." "Woo-woo, I don't want to. I want to sleep with Papa. I want Papa to tell me stories." Chapter 19. Let's go. Yang Yi waved his hand in high spirits. Coarse hair. A childish voice was also trying to shout. Yang Yi was carrying big and small bags, and Shishi was also following behind her father, carrying her small school bag. "Hey hey," she cried, as if she was struggling to move. Today, the little girl wanted to help her father. But what could a little girl who was not even 4 years old help? Yang Yi couldn't persuade her, so he put 2 picture albums he bought for her in her small school bag and asked her to carry them. In fact, Yang Yi didn't make much noise in moving this time. Yang Yi basically didn't move the things in the old rental house. He just packed some simple personal clothes, some military uniforms, military medals and other items that belonged to the original Yang Yi. These were the precious memories that Yang Yi would take with him wherever he went. Although now Yang Yi didn't pay much attention to them, he hesitated for a while and still didn't throw them away. As for the remaining furniture, quilts and other sundries, Yang Yi didn't miss any of them and gave them all to the landlord, who was overjoyed. There was no need to move these things. It was troublesome, but more importantly, Yang Yi himself didn't like them. When they went to the new house, they saw that it was luxuriously decorated and had all kinds of high-end furniture. It was said that it was bought by the old man's son. In such a case, why should he take some shabby and simple things to affect the original style? "Sit in the back, sit in the back." Yang Yi put the things in the trunk, but when he came back, he saw Cece kicking her long legs, trying to climb into the front passenger seat. He called out helplessly. Cece had inherited the excellent genes of Yang Yi and Mo Fei. Her arms and legs were very long and slender. At the age of less than 4 years old, she was already more than 1 meter tall. She was not shorter than an ordinary 5 or 6-year-old child. Perhaps in another year, she wouldn't even be able to buy half a ticket to the amusement park. "Oh, you can't see from the back." She pouted and said. Yang Yi smiled. He reached out his left hand and put it under the little girl's armpit. He carried her and lifted her up from the ground. Ayaya. Shishi's feet were in the air. She cried out in fear and excitement. Yang Yi opened the door to the back seat without any explanation, stuffed her in, and fastened the seat belt. In fact, Yang Yi was still very confident in his driving skills. If it wasn't for the fact that he was afraid of trouble, he could have sped up Akina Mountain without wearing a seat belt. However, things were different now. He was not alone. His daughter was in the car. For the sake of his daughter's safety, he had to play it safe. The car was rented, but it didn't come with a safety seat. Yang Yi had to persuade the owner to rent the safety seat for his child. "I have to find some time to buy my own car." The little girl was still looking at her father angrily. However, her father was too strong. She couldn't struggle. She could only try to express her dissatisfaction with her expression. Well, you can see from the back seat. Yang Yi rubbed the little girl's head and said with a smile, "When you grow up, I'll take you to travel. I'll let you sit in the front seat." Really? She was suddenly attracted by her father's picture. When her father sat in the driver's seat and started driving, she asked expectantly, "Papa, where are we going to play?" Yang Yi drove the car. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "We're going to a very beautiful place. There are large areas of flower fields, clean and clear lakes, and mountains covered with snow in the distance." She tried hard to construct the picture her father created in her mind. However, she had little experience. When she heard the word snow, she became excited. "Papa, is that Sister Aisha's home?" She asked expectantly. Why did he mention Aisha again? In fact, Yang Yi didn't take the story he told to Shi seriously. He didn't know that children were the most obsessed with such fairy tales. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment, but still nodded and said, "Yes, she used to live at the highest point of the snow mountain." Just like Santa Claus, he left something for the little girl to remember. Then she wants to go. "Papa, when are we going?" She asked eagerly. "Not now. You have to wait until you grow up." Yang Yi smiled and said, "Otherwise you'll get sick when you go there." She pouted her small mouth and sat back regretfully. Well, she has to be obedient and eat well, so that you can grow up quickly. She was really like a little adult. The atmosphere was a little dull. Yang Yi thought for a moment, and hummed a song while driving. At least it wouldn't be so awkward. But what was he humming? "I drove the car to the fifth ring. I drove the car to the fifth ring. The fifth ring, you have one ring more than the fourth ring. The fifth ring, you have one ring less than the sixth ring." It was reasonable to say that Yang Yi didn't like this divine song. But in the last few years of his previous life, he was a little unscrupulous, so the kind of racing in the wilderness was full of charm when listening to this song. However, she obviously didn't like this song. After listening for a while, she coquettishly called out, She wants to listen to Sister Aisha's song. "Papa, can you sing this?" Again? Yang Yi's face was bitter. Last night, the little girl pestered him. Not only did she tell him the story of Frozen again, but she also sang, "Let's Go" over and over again. Yang Yi was not a professional singer like Mo Fei. If he had to sing this nursery rhyme over and over again, he would get tired of it. Yes. The little girl smiled happily and nodded vigorously. Well, Yang Yi really didn't know what to do with his daughter. Cough, cough. Yang Yi cleared his throat and began to sing. "The underscore snow underscore glows underscore white underscore on underscore the underscore mountain underscore night underscore not underscore a underscore footprint underscore to underscore be underscore seen." Yang Yi's singing of this kind of song wasn't good, mainly because it was difficult to sing the mellowness of a female voice. However, his pronunciation was clear and his intonation was good, so he could still sing the original charm of the song. She still couldn't understand the meaning of the first few verses of the lyrics. The words were too complicated, but she still blinked her big crystal clear eyes and listened carefully. The car drove onto a straight suburban road. On both sides of the road were green farmland and neat eucalyptus trees. The gentle spring breeze rustled the leaves. Yang Yi rolled down the window and was ready to sing at the top of his voice. "Let underscore it underscore go underscore." She was waiting for this sentence. Her eyes lit up and she excitedly sang with her father. "Let underscore it underscore go underscore. Can't underscore hold underscore it underscore back underscore any underscore more." She sang this sentence the most familiar. Her childish voice, probably inherited from her mother's musical sense, sang every word correctly. Not to mention, she even sang better than her father. Yang Yi smiled slightly. He lowered his voice and just led the little girl. As if singing together, the father and daughter's voices floated out of the car. On this suburban road, it was gentle and beautiful. Chapter 20. The weather in Harbor City was very good today. The sun shuttled between the high-rise buildings and shed a warm light on this international metropolis. In front of a Western-style small white building, Hu Songnan was watering the flowers in the yard. This was his son's home. The villa looked small and not luxurious enough. It even had a sense of age. But don't underestimate it. People who can live in a villa in Harbor City where every inch of land is expensive are definitely not ordinary local tycoons. Hu Songnen came to his son's home and lived there for almost a week, but he didn't go out to see the world. It was mainly because he liked to be quiet and didn't like to be noisy. Playing the piano and taking care of the flowers were the only things he could do. His grandson and granddaughter were very well behaved, but after all, young people also had their own life. Of course, he didn't have much company. "Dad, let's go." A middle-aged man who was nearly 50 years old, but well-maintained, came out and said respectfully. This was the eldest son of the old man, Hu Yongxiang, the boss of Tianxiang Records, which ranked fourth among the record companies in Harbor City. Although his status was high, he still showed respect in front of his father. "What do you think an old man like me can give you advice?" Hu Songnan sat in his son's car and said, "I'm not in pop music. I'm afraid I can't play with you young people's things." Hu Yongxiang personally drove for his father. He smiled slightly. "Dad, you have been a teacher for so many years. You have rich experience. You can help me train these musicians in the company. I can't think of anyone more suitable than you for the position of chief music director." In fact, he was also talking nonsense. There were music directors in the record company, but he had never heard of the position of chief music director. It was just set up by Hu Yongxiang for his father. He wanted his father, who was still healthy, to move around more. Otherwise, if he stayed at home all the time, his body would get sick. When they arrived at the company, Hu Songnan didn't make any comments. He kept a kind smile, greeted the people coming and going, and had a gentle conversation with the company executives called by his son. "Grandpa, who you actually know how to speak Cantonese?" Hu Yongxiang's secretary, Yi Xiaofeng, was a young girl. She was the daughter of one of the company's shareholders. She was sent here for training. Her personality was relatively straightforward, and she asked without thinking. For the convenience of everyone's understanding, the following Cantonese dialogue is automatically adjusted to Mandarin. "Yes, when I was young, I also studied in Hong Kong." Hu Songnan didn't mind. He nodded and responded with a smile. "Xiaofeng, although he's from the mainland, don't underestimate him." Hu Yongxiang was a little dissatisfied. He had always thought that the old man was his lifelong idol, so he tried his best to show off like a child. When he was young, he traveled to Hong Kong, the German Confederation, Wien in Austria, and many other places to study and teach. Before my father was 55 years old, he was invited to perform at WINJSDT almost every 1 or 2 years. Although Hu Yongxiang's musical talent was not high and his attainments were limited, looking at his excited expression, one could tell how deep the old man's influence on him was. "So powerful?" Yi Xiaofeng's eyes seemed to be blooming with little stars. No, these are all empty words. Now that I want to communicate with you young people, I have to talk about pop music. I still have to ask you for advice on this." Hu Songnen laughed and said humbly. After talking for a while, Hu Yongxiang asked the secretary to accompany his father. He was the boss of a big company, and there were a lot of things for him to deal with. Yi Xiaofeng didn't know how to arrange it, so she took the old man to walk around, introducing the various departments of the company and various interesting places, like a tourist. "This is our recording studio. The 5th and 6th floors are all recording studios. There are a total of 8 rooms. Sometimes they are rented out. Of course, most of the time, they are used by the singers of our company." Although Yi Xiaofeng was not very proficient in the business, she was still a very smart person. She saw Hu Songnan's rare interested expression, so she slowed down her pace. "Grandpa Hu, how about I check which recording studio is empty and you try it?" Yi Xiaofeng took out her mobile phone and said with a smile. Hu Songnan was indeed interested. He nodded and said, "Then you ask, but don't ask which one is empty. If it's not disturbing, I want to watch." "Hee, how can it be disturbing? Your guidance is their blessing," Yi Xiaofeng said sweetly. She found it quickly. It was the recording studio used by the company's top male singer, Chen Yijia. There was no problem at all. The boss's father wanted to watch, Who dared to say no? Of course, Chen Yijie was also a humble person. He even put down the work at hand and introduced his current situation to Hu Songnan. Recently, I have been preparing for this year's new album. In our industry, it's called collecting songs. Chen Yijie was the most popular male singer under Tianxiang, and he had the ability to write his own songs. At his peak, he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the four singing kings of Harbor City. However, singer-songwriters also had an awkward situation. Their status would fluctuate. His songs in the past few years were not as popular as before, and gradually fell behind. This also caused Tianxiang's ranking to slip from the original 3rd to the 4th place. Therefore, Chen Yijie wanted to release a new album this year, and the company decided to help him collect songs. They couldn't release such a completely personal album. The songs that I wrote and the company collected are basically enough to release an album. But I still lack a title song. Chen Yijie smiled bitterly. You see, I'm about to fall asleep here, and I don't have a clue at all. Eason, you're asking too much of yourself. Yi Xiaofeng had a strong background, so she didn't mind and interrupted. Even Sister Guzi said that it's hard to satisfy. Chen Yijie shrugged helplessly. It's good to be strict with yourself. Hu Songnen smiled slightly, without painstaking effort. How can it be as joyful as the fans when listening to songs? Young man, you should listen to more classical music when you're free. Those masterpieces were made by masters who spent half of their lives or even their whole lives. You're right, but the society now is very fickle. If you don't release an album in a year, I'm afraid that others will catch up with you, and you will have no chance to make a comeback. Chen Yijie sighed. After all, Hu Songnen was old, and he felt tired after standing for a while. He sat down on the sofa and smiled. Originally, I just wanted to see how you youngsters record songs. You don't have to accompany me, it's too much of a hindrance to your work. I'll just quietly listen and watch with Xiaofeng. Chen Yijie didn't put on an act and quickly immersed himself in his work. He really treated Hu Songnan and Yi Xiaofeng as invisible people. Chen Yijie's work was actually very boring. He repeatedly played the music score that he had previously written, carefully considering the structure of the lyrics. From time to time he would stop to sketch on the paper, and from time to time he would cross out what he had just written and redo it. Hu Songnen could still accept it because he was familiar with this situation. However, Yi Xiaofeng felt that it was boring. So boring. Grandpa Hu, I'll bring you somewhere else to play. Yi Xiaofeng fidgeted after staying for less than 15 minutes. Hu Songnen waved his hand, indicating that Yi Xiaofeng shouldn't disturb Chen Yijie. He was very focused on listening to Chen Yijie's humming. All right, Yi Xiaofeng helplessly covered her face. Not long after, she became even more restless. It was very boring. If she had this time, she might as well sneak out and discuss with the receptionist on the first floor how to get a new one. This idea, like a weed, grew in Yi Xiaofeng's heart and was very difficult to control. Within a few minutes, her eyes darted around as she thought of sneaking away. But suddenly Hu Songnen stood up. Are you leaving? Yi Xiaofeng was ecstatic and also stood up. However, Hu Songnen went straight to Chen Yijie. He patted Chen Yijie's shoulder and said with a smile, Your voice is very recognizable. It's a sad and restrained magnetic voice. Coincidentally, a few days ago, I heard a song that suits you very well. Do you want to give it a try? Chapter 21. Where did you get the money? Live here. When Murphy came to pick up her daughter, she saw Yang Yi's new address and looked at Yang Yi suspiciously. It was no wonder that Murphy was suspicious. What kind of place did Yang Yi live in before? And what kind of place did he live in now? Not to mention Yang Yi, even Murphy herself was a little jealous. Mom, don't scold Papa. Papa said you can live here too. She quickly ran over and hugged her mother's long legs to persuade her. Who is going to live here? Mo Fei was dazed for a second and said, in his previous life, Yang Yi really wouldn't spoil this bad-tempered woman. However, it seemed that after spending a few days with Shi, Yang Yi's edge became less sharp. Looking at Murphy's appearance, he only raised his eyebrows and didn't have the intention to quarrel with her. He lazily took out the lease contract from a drawer and handed it to Murphy. Here, I rented it for 1 yuan. You can say that I'm lucky. I met a good person. How could Murphy believe such a good thing? She frowned and looked at the lease contract again and again, but she couldn't find any problems with it. Finally, Murphy gave up. She reluctantly handed it back, but still asked suspiciously, "Why are you renting such a big house?" The changes Yang Yi had shown her this time were too big, too big. Was this still the honest Yang Yi from before? Was he still the unrepentant and stubborn Shishi's father who made her stomp her feet? "I'm opening a coffee shop," Yang Yi said. "Coffee shop? You? You don't even drink tea and only drink water. You want to open a coffee shop?" Murphy felt her vision go dark. She asked unhappily, "Do you know what coffee is?" Yang Yi was speechless. "Don't look down on people, okay? Do you want me to make you a cup of coffee?" "No, I don't drink instant coffee," Murphy snorted. Yang Yi was too lazy to bicker with her. He turned around and went to the bar. There was a small bar in the restaurant on the second floor. In the past, the old man probably used it to drink wine. People who played classical music were really elegant. But now Yang Yi temporarily occupied the place and set up his own coffee utensils. At first, Murphy's cold eyes have a look of distrust, but gradually, it was replaced by surprise. Yang Yi used a hand-cranked grinder to carefully grind the coffee beans. Throughout the process, his movements were very delicate, not at all like a beginner who was in a hurry. This scene made Mo Fei feel extremely surprised. She could not believe her eyes. How does he know this? And how does he grind it with his hands? Murphy was puzzled. It must be known that most people who like to drink coffee would choose to use a one-stop coffee machine to make coffee. Murphy belonged to this kind of people. She would drink coffee to refresh herself, but she didn't like to play with so many details. Only a true lover would use this kind of retro method to grind beans, right? Because they would enjoy the process. Moreover, it was said that this way of grinding the powder is more uniform and fine, and can make the best coffee taste. But Murphy had tried it before, and with her level, she couldn't taste the difference. Just as Murphy was in a daze, Yang Yi had already brought the coffee in front of Murphy. He gently placed it on the counter in front of Murphy, and then very gentlemanly smiled. "The coffee beans aren't the best, but please try it." With Yang Yi's big body, it was actually very difficult to be associated with the word gentlemanly. But for some reason, Murphy was still teased by Yang Yi, and her heart suddenly beat faster. Murphy was used to being cold, and her expression wouldn't be ugly. But in order to hide the panic in her eyes, she picked up the coffee and took a big sip. Yang Yi saw this scene and was speechless. Who just said that he didn't know coffee? Now that someone was drinking coffee like this, wasn't it like a cow chewing on peonies? After Mo Fei calmed down, she finally felt the aroma of the coffee, as well as the faint bitterness. It was quite tasty. "You put sugar in it?" Murphy looked at Yang Yi. "Yes, you probably can't drink the original taste," Yang Yi said lightly. Of course, he didn't put sugar in his coffee. He really put sugar in it for her. Murphy's heart warmed, but she was even more delighted. How did Yang Yi know her taste? Could it be that he specially researched it for her? However, Yang Yi was not satisfied and continued to spoil the mood. There is a study that shows that when women drink coffee, they would put an average of 1.5 spoonfuls of sugar. It really makes sense. Suddenly, the warmth in Murphy's heart disappeared without a trace. She clenched her fists, and was almost angered by Yang Yi to the point of gnashing her teeth. "Okay, now I believe that you can open a coffee shop." Murphy pursed her red lips, and began to pull out her bag. "Your coffee shop, I want to invest, I want half of the shares." "What?" Yang Yi looked at Murphy in astonishment. "What, you don't welcome me to invest?" Murphy stared and said. Yang Yi of course didn't want to. He originally opened this coffee shop for the sake of feeling, and never thought of making money. If he invested some money in it, the loss would be counted on him. Of course, there was no rent, so the loss wouldn't be much. But the problem was, why did this woman also want to get involved? Yang Yi had a feeling of his favorite toy being targeted. If it was him in his previous life, Murphy would have already been cut into 8 pieces by him. "And I don't welcome you," Yang Yi flatly refused. Murphy was almost angered to death by him. She was thinking of ways to give him some money to let him live financially, but in the end, she was bluntly rejected. She unwillingly said, "This is also Shishi's home. Why can't I invest a little?" "No." Yang Yi's reply was simple and crude. "Then where did you get the money to renovate? Where did you get the money for the startup capital?" Murphy was about to fight with him, and spoke with a bit of gnashing teeth. "I have money." Yang Yi felt that if he continued to speak, it would be a bit difficult to deal with. After all, he really couldn't explain that sum of money. "You can give up on this idea. If he knew earlier, he wouldn't have earned this money." Yang Yi secretly sighed in his heart. Why is this woman so troublesome? Why does she keep asking? "No, I have to find a way to make money and launder this money. In the future, there's no need to torment like this. It's not difficult to earn money properly. Now, I might have to find an excuse. It's really tiring." Unknowingly, Yang Yi's thinking began to be a little more similar to that of a normal person. However, Murphy was furious with Yang Yi. Her whole person was like a lit explosive barrel, about to explode at any time. Fortunately, at this time, Shishi ran over from the sofa, held her mom's hand, shook it, and said coquettishly, "Mom, don't be angry with Papa. I'll take you to see my room, okay?" She didn't understand what her parents were talking about, but she still felt that the atmosphere was not right. Murphy was finally pulled away by her daughter, and when she looked back, she left a resentful look at Yang Yi. Of course, the big star was still very free and easy. She snorted in her heart. "If you don't want to give, then don't give. Why would I care? Damn, Yang Yi, close down early, and see if this aunt will help you or not." You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.